Now, can I also ask, so the way you defined atheist, did I get it right that you said you're an atheist in the sense that you believe there are no good arguments for God's existence?
Yes, I would agree with something like Christopher Hitchens, who said, the atheist does not say there is no God. The atheist says there's no reason to believe in a God.
Okay, so by that definition, a Christian fideist who believes there are no good arguments for God's existence, but nonetheless they are for non-rational reasons a believer in God, they would be an atheist by that definition.
Possibly, sure.
Okay, so that would seem to be a defeater for the adequacy of your definition, because if a person would qualify as an atheist even while believing in God, you probably would want to revise the definition.
Well, I just adopt the definition because it's what's most used by most atheists, as far as I know, most big atheists. So it's mostly just a representation of the position. The definition itself isn't really important.
Okay.
Now, there's another way to do it, and that's with abstract objects. Like a triangle, if you draw a triangle, it will always add up to 180 degrees, the angles. That is also true independent of opinion. But triangles don't exist. They're not a part of the universe, but they can still be true independent of opinion. So triangles also refute subjectivism. Are you with me so far?
I don't know about the statement triangles refute subjectivism because I'm not convinced abstract objects exist. But if you want to, but what I have to say though, I'm finding it like mildly frustrating that you're moving away from the question, right? So the question. No,
I'm moving towards the question because your question is missing the point. You're missing the point completely. So I've got to walk you there step by step.
Wait a second. No, you don't get to just declare I'm missing the point if I start a line of questioning that you have trouble with. So the line of questioning that we were on before you moved, right, was we asked, what does the sentence killing a baby is wrong mean? It means killing a baby is immoral. What does killing a baby is immoral means? It means killing a baby is out of line with some kind of law of the universe. What does killing a baby is out of line with some kind of law of the universe mean? It means killing a baby isn't an instantiation of some kind of abstract object. So I'm asking you what you think you're saying there. What do you mean by law of nature or abstract object? What is the abstract object? What is the law of nature?
Again, so let me try to explain this again. So
no, wait, Tom, I have to say, I'd lose interest completely if someone tries to dodge a line of questioning. Do you want to answer?
I'm not dodging anything. Your question.
Okay.
What is the question, Isaac?
Well, wait. Yeah. So the question is,
what is the question?
What's the law of nature?
Can you
rephrase
it?
Gravity is gravity. That's a dumb question.
No, you can give a mathematical description of gravity. What's the law of nature you're referring to? And if you want to take time to think it through, and we can do like a round two, like I'm easily reachable. You can also find me in the Discord.
What I'm not sure that I understand your question, Isaac. What are you saying? What is the moral law of nature? What exactly are you specifically saying?
So you're gravity is a law of nature. You're gonna have to track your way through these sentences. Okay, Adam. So here we go. So he says that it is killing a baby is wrong. Okay. What does that mean? What does it mean to say killing a baby is wrong? It means killing a baby is immoral. Still don't really know what that means.
Yeah,
so I asked,
exactly.
What does it mean? Right. Okay, good. So I asked, what does it mean to say it's immoral? He says, well, it means killing a baby is out of line with some kind of law of nature.
Okay.
Right. So I'm asking about what that law of nature is. And he did say something further about.
You're asking for a mathematical description of that law of nature.
No, it doesn't necessarily need to be
describe. Well, gravity you could describe. You'd say masses are attracted to one another.
But I don't want you to make it seem like I'm setting some kind of unfair bar. Like
no,
mathematical
I don't think you are.
Sounds kind of like. I mean, I'm not expecting him to start delivering like the moral algebra. I just want to I just want to understand what the sentence means.
But
right?
if we say what is the law of gravity?
Can you just wait? Just hear me out for 1 second, because I want to make sure you understand the point here. So I'm trying to understand what, on Tom's view, the sentence "killing a baby is wrong" means. It means killing a baby is immoral. Still don't know what that means. It means killing a baby is out of line with some kind of law of nature. Okay, but what's the law of nature? So I'm waiting for him to answer that so that I can make sense of the original statement that killing a baby is wrong.
I agree. What's the law of nature,
So
Tom?
if you asked Isaac Newton, what is gravity, and he gives you the equation, that doesn't tell you what gravity is. It just is a description of gravity, right?
I would disagree. I would say the description is telling you what it is. Yeah.
So,
you don't think wait, I have a question. Surely a description is telling you what something is.
Yeah, that's literally the whole point of a description.
No. because Newton never said what gravity was.
Okay, well, if you want to take a fringe view on description,
no, this isn't a fringe view at all. Newton,
wait, you don't think it's a fringe view on description to say that descriptions don't tell you what things are?
Oh my God.
Are you honestly going to tell me that's not a fringe view on description?
Stop. Newtonian mechanics describes gravity. It tells you nothing about what gravity is. It doesn't even try to. I mean, does that not make sense to you?
Okay, so there's two things that are standing out to me. So the first is that it's crazy that you're not conceding that this is a radically idiosyncratic view on description. Okay, everyone understands a description to be some kind of to be telling you what something is. I mean, you must have a radical understanding of description. And then the other point, because that's just a side point, that's almost just a tangent based on you saying one sentence that I had trouble with, right? The main point is that we have this sentence, killing a baby is wrong. I ask you what it means killing a baby is immoral. I ask you what that means, it means it's out of line with some kind of law of nature. I ask you what that law of nature is, and you can't tell me. So if you have an answer to that question, I'm happy to continue. If you can't, I think that's the debate.
Can you present that argument that would justify your conclusion that it's more likely than not that theism is false?
Sure. If there was an all-powerful, all-good God, then he would have created the best of all possible worlds. We don't live in the best of all possible worlds. Therefore, there is no all-good, all-powerful God.
So why do you think there is such a thing as a best of all possible worlds?
Because I believe in objective morality. And I believe that that can be instantiated by the idea of the best of all possible worlds.
I believe in objective morality too, but it also seems to me that there's something conceptually flawed with the idea of a best of all possible world, in the same way that there's something conceptually flawed with a highest number. So what
How so?
Well, because you can always count one higher. You could always add a little bit more good to a possible universe. So how would you argue that there is such a concept as an absolute best possible world is a coherent one?
Okay, I would argue that the best of all possible worlds would be one where all wills have sovereignty over themselves and total freedom to achieve their will, so long as they do not impose upon the sovereignty of others. That would be my description of the best of all possible worlds. So essentially, every will gets its own universe. You can do whatever you want with it, and all interactions are voluntary.
Like if a 3-year-old is going to reach his or her hand out and touch a hot stove, and the parent imposes upon the child's will and prevents them from doing that, is that an evil action on behalf of the parent because they imposed upon the child's will?
Sort of. Based on my definition, that would be one immoral action to prevent a greater immoral action. And so it's justified because we don't live in the best of all possible worlds.
Okay, I think that's a defeat or an objection, at least, to your definition, because I think it's actually a moral good that the parent would prevent their child from burning their hand on the hot stove. But you're saying, anyway, that on your view, that is an immoral action for the parent to prevent the child from burning their hand. But you said that the child's burning their hand would be a greater moral evil. So that does actually still invite another rejoinder, which is, well, then how do you know that when there are wills imposed upon one another in the actual world, that there is not, from God's perspective, a morally sufficient reason to allow those impositions?
For my definition, I define immorality as just any involuntary imposition of will. That is my intuitive understanding of what immorality is. And so a world where all interactions are voluntary would eliminate all immorality. It seems more moral to me if they were optional than if they were imposed upon involuntarily. That just seems intuitively to be immoral to me.
So it seems that statement is incoherent with what you said a moment ago, because you said the parent's imposition upon their child would be immoral by your definition, which, again, I stated I don't think that is correct, but that is your view. But then you stated that the parent is justified because the child's burning their hand would be a greater evil. But of course, the child willingly burning their hand is not an imposition upon the child's own will. It is the actualization of the child's own will. So how could that be evil on your definition when you define an immoral or evil action as one that is imposing upon a will?
Because I include nature's imposition on will as also being immoral.
So or in this case, not nature per se, but, well, maybe I guess it would mean the laws of nature in terms of the properties of the stove burning the flesh.
Yes.
Okay, so that's an extended analogical understanding of imposition upon will. So your view is that if the child burns their hand and suffers, nature has imposed its will upon the child.
Or involuntarily restricted the will of the child in some way, yeah.
Okay. Do you think that a person can rationally disagree with your understanding of best of all possible worlds, and thus your objection to theism based upon suffering as you perceive it? Or do you think your arguments are sufficiently strong that it should rationally compel me to agree with you?
Oh, no, this is just my own idea, and I haven't been able to talk about it enough to articulate it to the point where I think it would be compelling to everyone. So absolutely, people can rationally disagree with it.
For all if there's anyone who knows physics watching, and I'm doing an embarrassing job with gravity, forgive me, but I'm sure we all understand that gravity is some kind of like description of like objects and their like, properties and what they do and how they move together or whatnot, right? So yeah, we're going to say that the apple falling is an instance of that, right? Now, what is the baby being killed an instance of? It can't be that it's an instance of wrongness, because if it's wrongness, then all you're saying is this trivial claim that it's an instance of something that doesn't move us towards the best or the world with the least preference violation, which everyone will agree with. So what's it an instance of?
So how would you answer that question for the gravity example? If I say we see the apple falling.
Yeah, I just did that, right? So we can go through it again. So when we're going to say that that's an instance of matter behaving in accordance with some kind of mathematical description we have.
So what you just said is a tautology is circular. You're just saying we have.
How's it circular? Wait, how is it circular?
Because you just said that we have a description of something that we see, and we're describing it. That's all you said.
What's the circle?
So we have a description of a mathematical description, and the apple falling is.
Don't just try to tell me random things are circular because I pointed out something you're saying is circular. What is circular about what I'm saying at all?
You're interrupting me every time. Stop interrupting me so I can answer your question. Because
what is
hey guys, one at a time. You want me to do time? Tom, go ahead. You have the floor.
Would you stop interrupting? Holy shit! I've tried to answer this 4 times, and you guys keep interrupting. Shut up, please.
You have a minute.
So
go ahead.
Oh my god. So we see the apple falling, and we have mathematical descriptions of how the apple falls, and you're saying the apple falling is an instantiation of the descriptions. That's a circle.
How's that a circle?
Don't interrupt. Let him continue.
Well, that was the end, so that was fine. So if we have descriptions, and we see an instantiation, and that instantiation is of the descriptions, that's literally a circle.
What's a circle about that?
If P then Q, Q then P, like what?
Where are the propositions P and Q? What are you talking about?
So we have an object falling.
And wait, saying if P then Q and if Q then P is just a biconditional implication. That's not a circle.
No, that is exactly a circle.
Well, wait. Are you familiar? Are you competent with propositional logic? Well, let's be clear.
Yes, I am. Yes,
right.
I'm extremely competent. So could you?
Okay, so when is the biconditional true?
So let's just go back to these.
No. Wait, if you say you're competent, if you are, you'll answer this. When is the biconditional true?
When is the biconditional true?
Explain.
It's a circle.
Can you explain it, Isaac, for the audience?
Wait. No. I think that Tom is pretending to know what he's talking about.
Okay,
when is the biconditional? Don't Google it. When is the biconditional true?
When is the biconditional true of your circle? It's a circle.
No. When is the biconditional operator in propositional logic true? I see you looking at something. Are you Googling? Yeah, so then don't say you're competent with it.
So let us know, Isaac, for the audience, so we can all be in on it.
Yeah, so the biconditional is true when P and Q are true. It's false when P is true and Q is false. It's false when P is false and Q is true. And it's true when P and Q are both false.
Well, that was absolutely no help at all. But anyway, continuing.
Well, the takeaway is that it has a precise mathematical definition within propositional logic, which Tom just pretended to know.
Okay, so, I gotcha.
What sort of process through natural faculties would give us the ability to grasp moral facts?
Yeah, so I'm not making the Platonic argument. I'm saying it's like morality is actually grounded in a physical particle or a physical wave that we haven't discovered that is transmitted through the universe, just like gravity is, as a function of some natural process. And it interacts with our brain in some way, like gravity interacts with our bodies, and that's how it transmits to us.
What makes that a good explanation? What makes that a more satisfying explanation than the theist's explanation?
Oh, it's not. I'm just saying it's an equally plausible alternative. I see both as equally implausible.
Equally equally implausible and equally plausible?
Well, I mean, those mean the same thing, but yeah, equally implausible.
Also, or equally plausible. So you find the theistic explanation as plausible as the alternative explanation that you've proposed.
Yeah, but I mean, I see them both as really implausible, but they're equally plausible from the same perspective. So like if you see something as super implausible, then it's equally as plausible as any other implausible thing.
So, okay, so let's go back for a moment to your definition of atheism, right? Your definition of atheism was with respect to the absence of good arguments for God's existence. Now, why don't we add another alpha privative, so that the A of denial, and say atheism is the view that there are no good arguments for atheism, as you've defined it. It seems that you are now backed into an atheist position, at least with respect to this argument, because you're saying that you find both arguments for God's existence with respect to morality and the atheistic explanations to be equally plausible and implausible, which seems to be a defeater to your position.
I'm not sure I follow. Let me just see if I can. So I don't think there's any reason to make any conclusions about what the true fundamental nature of reality is. It's possible it's theism, but it's also possible it's pantheism. I don't believe in either of these. They're just possibilities. And this moral law thing that I'm supposing, it's just a pantheistic kind of counter explanation to the theistic explanation of morality. So both could explain morality, which means the moral argument doesn't indicate theism because it works equally as well for pantheism. And so we should just stop and say, here's this just one thing we just don't know, which means it's not actually evidence for God. Does that make sense?
Well, so like when you say that you find arguments, the explanation I've given for a moral knowledge and the alternative explanation you've given equally plausible and equally implausible, it seems that you are losing the basis to say there is an asymmetry between our positions. Before you were suggesting, I understood you to be suggesting that you would have a better explanation than the one I proposed. But by failing to give a better explanation, you're not providing an objection to my argument.
So the reason pantheism would be preferable to theism would be because of the problem of suffering. But just let me list. So if we have a compass and you say the compass points north, and I shake the compass and it points in a different direction, and I shake it again, it points in a different direction, the compass doesn't actually point north. It's not evidence of that direction being north. It's just a broken compass. So my argument is that your arguments for the existence of God work equally as well for the existence of the lack of a God, like pantheism or deism or polytheism or transtheism or any of these other alternatives, which means none of your arguments are actually evidence of any of these conclusions. They're just a question we don't know the answer to. And so my position of atheism is just to say these arguments don't indicate anything. We just have to stop and say we don't know. That's my position.
And first of all, I'm very sympathetic to moral realism, right? So I'm not just attacking moral realism.
That's fine, but again, you're going way too pedantic here. None of this is.
But I just don't understand what you're saying when you say you're a moral realist. Like you were trying to give an analogy.
I believe there is a
maybe try a different analogy. Maybe
so you don't need an analogy. I'm a moral realist because I believe there is a moral fact that is true, independent of minds. It's just that simple. It doesn't matter how it's true.
So why should we believe that?
Oh, it doesn't matter. I'm a moral realist independent of why or how. I can just say it's a fact and say I'm still a moral realist. So that's irrelevant to whether or not I'm a moral realist. Why and how is a separate question.
Well, do you mind answering that question?
Why? I believe it's what we get to, the conclusion we get to if we look at all of the evidence of morality and compile it into what does this principle describe, or what is a principle that describes all of the different cases of morality, the moral progress, moral intuition, and moral dilemmas. If we like plot them out like a piece of evidence, what do they indicate? And this principle is what they seem to indicate, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I don't understand that because that would be straightforwardly true for the error theorist for any other view.
No, that would be false.
I mean, that's like if I said, "Oh, I believe in God because X, Y, and Z," and you said, "Well, wait a minute, the atheist can also affirm X, Y, and Z. Why would you believe in God for that reason?"
I told him this so many times, just had to.
No, I already debunked that pretty simply. So I believe there is a statement that is true that refers to something independent of minds.
Your realism. I'm gonna give it back to Doorman, but your realism has to be something that an error theorist can't agree with. Literally every kind of anti-realist can agree with.
No, you're confusing epistemology and ontology. The ontology of my morality is saying there is a statement, there is a moral fact that is true, independent of anybody say so. My epistemic basis of how I get there is irrelevant. Whether or not a more error theorist can agree with my epistemology of how I get there, they disagree with the ontology. They cannot agree.
That's just trivial, right? Of course they did. It's just a trivial statement, right?
So
but that's like if I ask you for an argument.
What you're saying is irrelevant.
No, it's not, right?
No, it is.
If I ask you for an argument for why X is true, and you give me an argument for why X is true, that could also be underdetermined with a different negation X thesis. That's not an argument for X at all, right?
No, wrong. That's the closure principle. There's still an argument for X. It's not an argument.
Wait. So let me get this straight. If I said theism is true because of X, and I give some argument X, and X could also be true under atheism, that's an argument for theism?
Correct. That's underdetermination. The closure principle states you can still use those. Yes. So if I flipped a coin and said it's evidence of heads, it could also be evidence of tails. But it doesn't mean it's not evidence of heads.
You must be speaking a different language right now because we have some
Google the closure principle. Google the closure.
I know there's many closure principles. There's epistemic closure. There's hold on.
So
let me get this straight.
I'm so done with you. No. No.
Let me just last quick question because maybe there's just a miscommunication here because it seems like you're affirming something that's a little ridiculous, but maybe I just misheard what you said. So let me
try to just answer right now. Yes, evidence can indicate many different conclusions. I'm not saying my evidence is proof that morality is objective. That's a leap.
But I'm asking you. That's a leap. I'm asking you, right? Well, I mean, we can call it whatever we want, right?
So I'm just asking
you. Suppose I'm on the fence, right? And I don't know whether realism or anti-realism. I'm agnostic about this, and I say
if I had compelling evidence, then I wouldn't need to argue at all. I could just give you the compelling evidence to convince everyone. I don't have compelling evidence to prove moral realism. I've said I don't every possible video. This is how I get to the conclusion. You may not agree with how I get to the conclusion. You may use the same methodology to get to a different conclusion. That's irrelevant. This is how I got to that conclusion. You don't have to agree with it. It's irrelevant.
So I don't understand why was the original discussion on why were you trying to defend moral realism in the original discussion from what I heard?
Because that's the conclusion I get to with the evidence.
But you just said you can't defend it. It's a leap. So I don't see why you would defend it, right? It's
that's the problem of underdetermination. You can still do that. That's totally fine. Like saying we see an apple drop, that could be explained by gravity, or it could be explained by the fact we're in the matrix and it's delusion by Descartes' demon. It's undetermined. It doesn't mean you can't use it to indicate one. You can still use it.
The entire point is when there is underdetermination, we appeal to other things that can determine which one is true. For instance, if I think every scientific theory, hold on, let me finish, D-Jump. I think every scientific theory is underdetermined, right?
They are.
I would just appeal to some virtue that I can sort of use to pick out which theory is true. If they're fully underdetermined, there's no reason just trivially to pick one over the other.
They are
unless we appeal to some other virtue.
They are all undetermined.
Great. So then if you're saying that all your evidence can point equally well to moral realism versus anti-realism, then I have no reason, or you have no reason to pick realism over anti-realism.
Maybe so, but I'm going to say this is the evidence I used. This is the conclusion I got to.
Wait.
So again, everything we see in the external world could be explained by the external world or the matrix, but I'm still going to conclude the external world.
No, but the whole point is when people do conclude the external world, they give arguments. They give Mordian arguments. They give semantic external arguments, like Putnam's arguments.
So they give arguments from intuition. It's irrelevant.
That's an argument, right? So if you want to say I'm a Mordian,
I can make an argument from intuition and say this. I intuitively
people actually do this, right?
Yes.
Right. So why don't you do that? Why don't you do like a humor kind of?
I just did 6 times. This is the
use the word intuition once. No. What humor and people who try to use intuitionism, right, are not. They're not doing anything.
I'm done with you. Right? You're being way too pedantic. You just don't understand the concept at all. No one actually brings this up. No, this is not an issue. You're confusing epistemology and ontology. Why?
I'm really not, dude.
You really are
ridiculous.
You really are.
All right, buddy. Troy, are you there?
Tom, are you sure?
Yeah. Did it?
That was legit pretty funny, actually.
Wait, is he still here?
Yeah. Tom, are you sure you don't want to continue with Dorman? He's a smart guy. Guy has a PhD for a reason, right? Probably worth interacting with. But if you don't want to, we can see if there's any other questions.
Yeah, I have no interest in this because I'm not saying that my conclusion of moral realism is totally justified. If I could do that, I wouldn't need to argue for it. I understand it's the weakest argument I have. I understand I can't indicate it. I've said that many, many times. It's just an intuitive leap.
T-Jump, I can be justified if you're thinking something and still have to argue for it, right?
Right, but I'm saying I can't get any. There's no conclusive evidence or reason to believe it.
I'm not asking for conclusive evidence. Look, even if you give me some weaker form of evidence, I'm all ears for it, right? I'm not saying you need to give me some
Right. So my argument, which I said like 6 times, is I get to the conclusion of this based off of this evidence. That's purely just intuition right there. I don't have any. I agree the evidence can be interpreted in many different ways, and I'm saying I get to this conclusion purely intuitively.
Right, but what I'm asking is there anything about the way you look at the evidence that makes you lean toward realism versus anti-realism?
No, it's just an intuitive leap. That's it. So it's like I say these can be explained by one principle, and I'm going to say this principle exists. It seems true, independent of minds, and that's it. It's just an intuitive leap. That's it. I've said this many videos. I don't have any conclusive proof or significant evidence to indicate this. It's just an intuitive leap.
Well, presumably we can actually defend this if we think some sort of intuitive leap is warranted or justified, but you presumably don't think that, right?
I have no idea. It's just all right.
Yeah, I guess there's no point in having this conversation.
But you don't think that just having, you think that a ground for any position is just having an intuitive leap?
Well, a ground doesn't have to be a good ground. You can just ground it with anything.
TJ, I think what was being asked of you, what was being asked is not that you have conclusive evidence. What was asked is essentially, why would you lean one way or the other if it seems like on both of them?
I've answered that.
Evidence
like intuition. Right, and I reject properly basic beliefs because I think they're silly. I think that we can prove they're wrong sufficiently amount of time that they're not justifiable for anything. It's just like saying our intuition. We have intuition that something is true. Intuition fails enough that the intuition is not a description and has no correlation, as far as we can tell, with reality as it is. It is purely a construction of our mind. So I would say that our properly basic beliefs are similarly just purely a construction of our minds. There is no correlation to reality as it is, and it undercuts all of Plantinga's properly basic arguments. Like, no. That from my perspective.
Wow.
Give me real quick your one sentence definition of atheism again.
There is no reason to believe in a God.
There is no reason to believe in a God. Couldn't a theist, like a fideist, be that?
Yes, they could.
So you think fideists are atheists?
If they agree with me on that, I'm happy to grant them that label if they want it.
But they wouldn't want that label, of course. Right?
They may not.
They would reject that label.
Right.
Wouldn't you need to add something to that to say there's no good reason to believe in God? And by the way, for the audience, a fideist is just someone who believes in God and doesn't think they need any justification for it whatsoever. They just believe it sort of by some weird notion of faith. They just believe it. So they could believe there are no good reasons or arguments, but they believe nonetheless. So, but they would certainly. I think it might be a little unfair to say, well, they're just another kind of atheist, right? Because they clearly believe in God.
Right, so they could be, but I tend to value epistemology more than I value ontology. I don't care about what exists. I care about what reasons we have to believe things. And that's all that matters to me. Like anything about beliefs, about what really exists, I think are completely ridiculous. We don't know what exists. The only thing that matters to us, or should matter to us, is what reasons do we have to believe it? So from my worldview, if there are no reasons to believe in a God, that trumps whether or not you believe there is a God. That's just how I prefer to use the language and the terminology. Certain models, certain moral theories make it seem like some immoral action is actually the best thing to do, that there isn't a better thing to do. So like in the case of putting people in prison or punishing people or judgment, certain models make those things seem like they are good things. Like the Christian model says judgment is good. We want this judgment thing. And I'm saying, no, my model is better than those models because it says judgment isn't good. It's just the least bad thing. And so the reason we should adopt my model is because it makes it's better than the models that say that there's this immorality like pushing the kid. And that's actually good. We actually want to do this. And in certain cases like Christianity, where they think that judgment is something that is to aspire to, and it's not just the least immoral thing, those kinds of systems are objectively wrong. I'm not exactly sure about utilitarianism, how that would apply.
I'm a bit lost now. So, sorry, you're saying that there are moral theories that say that judgment is good. Can you just expand on what you mean by that?
Like judging someone for doing a crime or a sin or something, and they deserve to go to hell or whatever, and so we're punishing them, and the punishment is actually a good thing. It's a good thing to harm them in response to something they did. They see that as a moral action. It's moral to judge or to harm or punish for crimes or whatever. And
I see. So like justice. You're talking about the concept of justice.
Right, right. And so from my perspective, that is immoral. It's immoral to do that. It's justified because you're doing one immoral action to prevent a greater immoral action, like putting someone in prison. But it's never the good thing to do. It's always the bad thing to do. It's just less bad than the alternative. And so,
well, but on your theory, everything is always the bad thing to do, isn't it?
No, there's always good things too. If you push the kid off the track, that is a bad thing, or you've pushed him off the track. But it's also a moral thing. You also helped his will by making sure he wasn't going to get run over by the train. So it's a bad thing in the sense you pushed him, and a good thing in the fact that you saved him. So it's not just one or the other.
Sorry, why is it a good thing?
Because you protected his will. You served his will to help him live and not die, assuming he didn't want to die. Right. So my position is that in a will, for a will to do something, there's two options. Either it's determined to do it for reasons, or it does it for no reason, in which case it's random. So those are the only two options. There's nothing you can insert there to get it. Either it's done for determined or it's done for no reason and it's random. And all natural things have the same properties. It's either determined or random. So it could be the universe was created by like some kind of random quantum probability wave, which is why it was created at that particular time as opposed to a different time. And so natural things can answer the same problem. And I could go a step further and say, if you want to say that there's some kind of new feature that will applies to get out of this dichotomy of determined or random, I could just say there's an undiscovered natural property that does the same thing without will. Because it seems to me to just positing this new thing we have no idea what it is and saying, well, it could do something that all the stuff we currently know about can't do. Well, I can just say the same thing. There could be this new natural something that can do something we just don't know about yet.
Well, no, that's how IBE or abductive reasoning works. Is you look at these things that need to be explained, and you come up with a hypothesis that explains all the things better than, say, a rival hypothesis. And it's not. The thing is that some properties. I mean, you're familiar with the idea of ad hoc, something being ad hoc, right? So to say that the universe has the ability to make choices would seem ad hoc, right? Because that does not really fit well with what we know about natural universe properties. But it fits perfectly well with a divine being, right?
Well, that's the argument I'm making there is that is equally as ad hoc as saying the universe can make choices. So
why is saying God can make choices ad hoc?
Because any choice made by any will ever is determined or random. Those are the only two options.
No, that's your personal view. You haven't really argued for that view. You're just asserting. What you're doing is just contradicting me. This is like the Monty Python argument clinic, right? Yes,
right. So I'm arguing it right now. I'm saying, give me a third option. Tell me how you can get out of this dichotomy. Either something is done. Okay. Tell me how. A
non-physical being that simply is an agent that can make choices.
But this dichotomy applies to non-physical beings, so I don't see how that gets you out. So every single choice is done for reasons.
How could a non-physical being? What is determining their behavior?
Their nature.
Okay, I mean, but when you use determine, you're talking about physics, I'm assuming.
No, not at all.
Okay.
So any reason or any choice done by any will is either going to be done for reasons. It doesn't matter if these are natural reasons, supernatural reasons, physical, non-physical. It's going to be done for reasons, or it's going to be done for no reason. The P or not P. If it's
so why can't God make a choice for a reason?
He can. That just means it's determined. And so it's determined equally as well as the universe is determined.
But see, that's the whole view about how free will, whether there's free will in the universe or not. And that's a whole nother can of worms. You can't just assert there is no free will and expect me to just go, oh, okay, I guess that doesn't work then.
Right. So I'm asserting that you have no basis of free will. And so you're using free will in this argument is completely ad hoc. Just like if I said the universe had this new free will natural property is totally ad hoc. If you're forced into a world without your consent, that's immoral. And just like if you're forced into slavery without your consent, that's immoral.
I think you got to add the suffering in there to get it to really work, right? Forced into a world with suffering.
Well, I would go further than that. I'd say if you're forced into any world which you didn't want to be a part of, I'd still consider that kind of immoral. But that's a deeper argument.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. Not to get on a rabbit trail, but
well, we can invert it and say, what if you're forced to live in a world with absolute joy and you didn't want to be there? I'd consider that immoral.
Like
well,
when goes forced into heaven, I'm like, like Satan or Lucifer is like, just God forces him into heaven. He's sitting there just miserable. Like, no, I hate this. Why did you force me to be here? I'd consider that to be immoral too.
So what if God knows you so well, right? He knows all of your desires. He knows everything you want. He even knows about the conflicts within you, right? That like you kind of want this and that, but you know they're kind of inconsistent, and he knows everything about you. He knows exactly the right world for you, the exact one in your mind that you've imagined and dreamed about. And he even has more wisdom than you, so he can make it a little bit better than you even imagined it. And he puts you in that world without your consent, and you're like, this is the greatest existence. It's just every second is actual bliss and happiness and all my favorite things all the time, and I'm happy. What about that kind of scenario?
Yep, that would be immoral because I can make it better. Just make it optional. So God can tell me, he can say, here is your perfect world. Here's what you're going to experience in it. You can go into it if you want to, or you can go to your own universe. And now it's optional. Now it's even more moral.
And let's say, it's interesting because that's exactly the kind of argument that Christians make about not overriding free will for salvation.
Right. I'm using the free will argument here. Granting it exists is the kind of the whole basis of the argument.
What if I want something which is, so let's take an example of a drug addict, right? That's a heroin addict that goes to his GP friend, his doctor friend, and says to him, just write me a script for some pills, man, like to get me some heroin or whatever. Now, the doctor there is faced with someone who obviously has an explicit desire for the heroin. And he probably has an implicit one too, because when he's an addict, he's going to have that desire anyway. But it seems to me that you're going to say it's morally good for the doctor to write him a script for some heroin in that case. I think you're going to find it very hard to wriggle out of that and say that it's not morally good.
Well, no, I do. I think it's morally good to give him the heroin, but again, it's pragmatically not like a justified immoral action not to do so because of the consequences.
Sorry, what's consequences got to do with it?
He's going to die. It's the same kind of a thing. You could do the moral action.
He's not necessarily going to die. They're not poisonous pills, right? Die eventually. No, I'm not suggesting that you're giving him something that'll kill him. You're just giving him some heroin.
It'll kill him eventually if he keeps taking it. It's bad for his health.
I mean, that's. Hold on a second. It's not going to. These pills aren't necessarily going to kill him. There's no reason to think that. I mean, everything's going to kill you eventually.
Okay, so if they're not going to kill him, then why wouldn't he give him the drugs? Like, if it's just to make him feel better, sure, why not give him the drugs?
I mean, I think the answer is something to do with like it being bad to encourage addiction or whatever. That it's bad for that reason. It's a morally bad thing to do. I mean, I guess to some extent I don't want to fill the gap in there too much because I'm not going to advocate a particular theory here. It doesn't really matter what I think why that reason is. I just think that it's true, isn't it, that encouraging a heroin addiction by like illegally writing someone a prescription isn't morally good, but it is clearly satisfying that guy's desires. So I mean, if you say, well, but in the long run he'll have some other desire that it goes against, I think we're just not talking about the same
thing. I
think yours.
I just say it's moral to give him the drugs. If he wants the drugs, it's moral to give him the drugs.
Right. Okay. So then, I mean, I think that so saying to everybody, so everybody's wrong that surprise parties are immoral, and everybody's wrong that giving drugs to heroin addicts is actually moral instead of immoral, right? I mean, I'm just saying, like, as a theory to sell to people, to try and tell people that they should adopt your view, it has weird consequences. I mean, like, that to me, you're just not talking about morality anymore because it's just obvious. And
the birthday case
isn't obvious.
The birthday case wouldn't be immoral. It's not immoral to throw someone a surprise party under my model. But you're right. Giving someone heroin if they want heroin, I see that as a moral thing to do. If you're helping them to achieve their will so that they can experience what they want to experience, yeah, that's a moral thing. I totally grant that.
Okay, so if you have the best of possible worlds, you still need some sort of normative claim saying that we should move towards the best of all possible worlds.
No, I don't actually make the normative claim we should move towards the best of all possible worlds. It's just a descriptive claim saying this is the best of all possible worlds.
Yeah, but if you're trying to create a moral system out of that, you're not creating a moral system. There's zero moral. You're saying you're creating a moral system with no normative claims at all.
Right, I'm getting rid of the oughts. These are just descriptive claims. I'm saying that morality is a description of the best of all possible worlds and a description of whether or not we're moving away towards it or away from it. So I'm getting rid of the oughts. That's my solution.
Morality is a description of the best of all possible worlds?
Correct.
Okay, I mean that's not how you defined it in your video when you were talking about this. I mean, you're like,
right. The introduction to morality. Morality is how we determine what is right and wrong. And
can you give us the definition that you started with, Drew?
Yeah, morality is the principles or criteria used to judge what is right or wrong. You're talking about normativity here. You're not talking about descriptions of the universe.
Correct. And then when I go deeper into it, I explain the way we determine what is right or wrong is we make a comparison to the best of all possible worlds.
But you're making no normative claims as we shouldn't move towards that necessarily?
Correct. It's just a descriptive claim. It's saying what is right and what is wrong is a descriptive claim of what is.
So why are you using the term morality here then? You're not actually, it's not a morality. You're just talking about descriptions of the universe.
Morality is not defined concretely. There is no solution to objective morality yet. There isn't an agreed upon solution. It's not a solved problem.
There may not be an objective solution to it.
But that means that it's open-ended what we can define as it or not. There are certain kinds of things which Dan Dennett calls strange inversions of reasoning, where we take what seems to be the case and we change it in some really drastic way to get to a better answer, like what quantum mechanics did and what Einstein did with general relativity and saying space-time can bend, and what Darwin did by saying complex things can come from simple things. So what I'm doing is counterintuitive. I agree with that. I am detaching the normative we oughts from morality and just making a descriptive claim, and that's my solution to the is-ought problem. So it's my.
That's not a solution to the is-ought
problem. It is actually a solution to the problem.
It's not, because if you the is-ought.
I'm more qualified to you on this.
I agree. No, look, the is-ought distinction is a problem because you're not solving the is-ought problem by just talking about the is. That's not a solution. That's just saying I'm only going to talk about half this conversation.
Right. So it's, if you want to be punched in the face, it's moral to punch you in the face. If you don't want to be punched,
but that's desires again. So we are talking about desires.
It's the will. The will. It's not, the desires can be a part of will. It may not be necessarily the only thing. So if I restrict your freedoms and I tie you up so you can't choose, regardless of what your will is, unless that is your will, that would be immoral. So I'm restricted your will so that you can't choose. That would be immoral unless you wanted it.
So if doing an action which limits my choices is immoral?
Yes, unless you specifically asked for that.
So, I mean, on the one sense, right, like, I turn 40, say, right, my 40th birthday, I wake up and I find that I'm now no longer 39 anymore. In some sense, my freedom has been limited by that, right? I'm not free to be 30 anymore, right? I'm not free to be in my 30s anymore. I now have to be in my 40s. Is that immoral? What just happened? Me becoming 40, is that immoral?
Well, I would consider like the physical consequences immoral, but not necessarily the abstract idea.
I mean, I guess I'm saying, do you think time passing itself is immoral? Is that because it does limit my choices, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, I'd say it'd be morally superior if we could turn back the clock voluntarily if you wanted to. That would be a morally superior option, so yes.
Okay, so just the passage of time is immoral on your theory?
Yes, if it's involuntary. It's exactly like the rock falling on you without your consent. It's immoral.
Right, so...
Could you actually describe to me how you could determine something is right or wrong within your definition of morality?
The same way all moral systems do, with moral intuition and moral progress as a guide.
But can you give me a single example?
Our society today is more moral than societies in the past because we allow acceptance of LGBT community when we didn't before. We don't burn witches. We don't put people in slavery because of the color of their skin. That's
why are those things bad though?
Because of moral intuition and moral progress. That's how we define
so morality. You're saying just wait, so okay,
that's our experience of morality. It's like we experience...
So you're just talking okay, so you're talking about our intuitions informing morality.
Yes, that's how epistemically we get to an understanding of morality.
Okay, so you're okay with Ted Bundy's intuitions being moral?
No, Ted, but we all humans, the way morality is justified by theists and atheists in ethics is we use moral intuition, moral progress as how we discover morality. It's kind of like gravity. We see gravity because things fall, and we say, well, this is something, and then we have to describe this something. So moral intuition, moral progress is how everyone in ethics uses as the grounds to say there is such a thing as morality.
Wait, okay, so moral progress, could you, I'm sorry, where there's a lot of could you please describe me moral progress in a world where we're just describing things?
Moral progress is something in this world that we have now. It's
okay.
true of just something we observe, like gravity. Gravity falls. It's independent of my theory of the best of all possible worlds. Moral progress in philosophy is the description that we see the modern societies as having progressed morally and become morally superior to past societies. For example, by being more accepting of the LGBT community, not imprisoning people by the color of their skin.
By what metric? By what metric are you saying that we're better than we were before?
You would have to ask the philosophers and just Google Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy moral progress, because that's the philosophy. That's not me. That's not my definition.
Okay, so what you're telling me is that we've made progress, okay, compared to the way we used to be?
That's the definition in philosophy of moral progress, yes.
But why is it progression? Why is slavery?
Go ask the philosophers.
Okay, so I'm asking you a question about your position, and you're telling me to go talk to somebody.
This is not my position. This is a definition of philosophy. You have to ask the philosophers that one. This has nothing to do with my position. This is just the grounds.
Basically, okay, this is a very simple question. Why is what used to be worse than today? Because for there to be progress, there has to be some discrepancy between
this is something in philosophy. This is not my position. This is the modern standardized definition of moral progress comes from the field of philosophy.
I'm not claiming it's your. I'm not.
The philosopher's basis is Google it on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Okay, look, I'm trying to figure out what your I don't care if it's your position. I'm trying to figure out how there's a comparison being made here. Is this something related to your view about the best possible worlds?
No. This is the foundation of all of ethics in every field of philosophy. Is the moral intuition and moral progress. It is everything in ethics. It's the basis for the theist model of morality. It's basis for the atheist model of morality.
What prompted you to talk about someone's views other than yourself when I asked you that question? Why are you bringing up somebody else?
What is my basis of? You asked how do I justify something about my basis on how we determine one thing is right or wrong, and I said I use moral intuition and moral progress, which is the same thing that every model of morality uses.
Okay, so it is your position.
Right, it's the basis of every model of morality. But
okay, if it's your position,
I didn't make this up.
It doesn't matter if you made it. If it's your position, explain it. I'm trying to understand what your position is, and you won't explain it. You're telling me to go Google somebody.
Right, because I don't need to explain this. This is philosophy. This is the basis of every field of ethics. If you reject this, you reject ethics.
Okay, give me a justification for saying that now is worse or better.
I don't need to. This is the basis of.
You just said it's about justification.
This is the basis of all of ethics. This is. I don't want to go into a detailed discussion of other philosophers' work. This has been.
You just said it's your position. You just said it's your position.
On the basis of their work, yes. If you want to know what their work is, go look at their work. This is not contingent on my position specifically. This is contingent on all of ethics. If you want to know something about the entire field of ethics, go research ethics.
Don't philosophers disagree on ethics? Different philosophers have different ethical frameworks.
Yes.
On these positions, no, not a single. Other than the people who reject.
What do you mean? Like Bentham and Hume have completely different moral philosophies.
Like every model of morality in ethics, every ethicist bases ethics on moral intuition and moral progress. That's it. Those are the two options. Those are what you got. Every single one of them. So going back to my point. Most physicists, the way science progresses in today's society is by convincing the consensus in the scientific field, not just a guy published a paper. That does not make it credible. You have to convince the consensus.
The consensus can be wrong, though. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, it can, but it's less likely to be wrong than a guy published a paper and says.
Okay, well, I didn't. I cited several papers.
Great, that's still less than the consensus. So mine is still more supported than yours is.
I don't really care how many votes we can take. I care about evidence, and that's what I like to focus on is the actual evidence.
And I tend to take the position that the majority has a better understanding of the evidence than you do, or those few guys that publish the paper do.
Okay, well, at the end of the day, I'm going to go on the evidence. I'm not going to be told what to think by a majority rule.
Right. I am too, and I'm going to go with the majority who understands it better than you do.
fine, you can claim that all you want, but if you can't actually present evidence or a better explanation, I can say I'm justified in saying I have the best explanation.
So I ground morality not in theism, but in pantheism, just an eternal, all-powerful nature as an undiscovered law of nature. And I agree that there is an objective morality, and that objective morality indicates the theistic God is clearly immoral.
Okay, so what determines something to be the best?
I agree with the theist argument that we have our moral intuitions and moral progress as indicative of an objective morality. So I agree there is an objective morality. I agree our moral intuitions and our moral progress indicate that objective morality. And the objective morality indicated by those things is that the most moral world is one where no being it's physically impossible to force one being to do something they don't voluntarily agree to do.
This is would be to ask Tom if intuitions make something like morals empirically true. I think Genus Trax is
absolutely not. No, not even a little bit. I'm just granting the theist argument for the sake of argument. It does not. Moral intuition and moral progress is just something in our head. It's just conceptual. There's no reason to believe it is actually an objective thing in the world from that line of argumentation. I just granted that in this debate for the sake of argument.
Gotcha.
I'm not talking about top-down in the way you are. I'm saying metaphysical absolutes. You can't start with metaphysical absolutes.
Well, who said we're doing that? I started with the evidence and build arguments from there.
Right, I'm saying any type of metaphysical absolute, if you add it to a theory ever, it's immediately unsupported. So if you think your God is all-powerful, you're immediately wrong. Or you're immediately unsupported. That's fine. My introduction is in general against all cases of theism. So if you believe in a God that's all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving, personal, eternal, conscious, or any of those infinites, you're immediately unsupported. That wasn't a rebuttal, that was my introduction.
We present other arguments to back that up. We don't just argue from just asserted ad hoc. But I mean, the three arguments I'm focusing on are compatible with deism, theism, anything right now. I'm just arguing for basic theism. As I said, I'm a classical apologist. If I can't get you to see theism, I'm not going to go any further.
Right. So again, my point is that no form of human knowledge can ever justify those kinds of absolute properties. They're completely ad hoc.
Can you define what you mean by justify?
Support, make it reasonable to believe with evidence or argument in some sense.
Why can't I make arguments that are reasonable belief based on the data?
Because no form of human knowledge can justify metaphysical absolutes. That was kind of the point of the...
Everything you just said cannot be justified because it's a metaphysical absolute.
I never said any metaphysical absolute. What are you talking about?
You did. You just made an absolute claim.
No, I didn't. I said no form of human knowledge, the limited kind that we currently have, which is not a metaphysical absolute.
That sounds like an
knowledge that we have. No. Because there could be other knowledge out there that could justify it that we just don't know about yet. So it's only a claim about human knowledge, not a claim about all knowledge.
It's possible, but I don't care about what's possible. As you said in your previous talks, an equal number of things are possible. I care about what's the most probable explanation. That's why I argued for the most probable explanation tonight. Just because there are other possible explanations, or just because we took a vote and not everyone agrees, that doesn't mean my arguments are wrong. Just like it didn't mean Galileo was wrong. It would have been absurd if the opponents of Galileo, it was the Dominicans, the Dominicans, if they would have said, no, we're right because we got the consensus. I mean, actually, they didn't even argue that way.
Okay, so again, my argument was that there is no evidence. There's no more probable explanation. They're all equally probable because all of the arguments are false. They indicate the absolutes with zero precision. They indicate them with nothing, like the square root of a pork chop. That your argument is effectively the square root of a pork chop, therefore God.
Why?
It's completely not.
Because
no form of human knowledge. Because no form of human knowledge can justify metaphysical absolutes. So to go back to my example, all evidence of the natural world is not evidence. There is no supernatural. Would you agree with that?
No form of knowledge can justify metaphysical absolutes, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Which
is demonstrated by all of them. No, it's not. It's an argument about human knowledge. The limited amount of human knowledge is not a claim about all knowledge.
You're still making that claim that your human knowledge, my human knowledge, cannot justify metaphysical absolutes. Therefore, you cannot make that absolute claim.
Nope, that's an epistemic claim.
Well, I reject it then. I don't agree with it then. If it's just an epistemic claim, that's just how you're determined knowledge, but that's not going to address
which is justified by all of the problems in philosophy and science which prove it to be the case, that no known form of knowledge can indicate metaphysical properties, like the problem of undetermination and induction and the problem of the criterion and the problem of universals and Agrippa's trilemma and the problem of easy knowledge. None of those arguments, those all fail. All of your arguments fail for the reason of the
most likely or best explanation in metaphysics.
Well, it means any argument that tries to indicate the metaphysical is just false. It does not do it. It cannot do it. It is the square root of a pork chop. Just false.
What is your evidence that it actually is metaphysically false? That's a metaphysical claim. You're making metaphysical claims saying that they're metaphysically false.
No.
Yeah.
I'm saying it cannot support or justify the metaphysical claim. I'm not saying it is metaphysically false. I'm saying the evidence does not justify a metaphysical claim.
Is it a metaphysical claim?
No, it's not. It's an epistemic claim.
No, you're making claims about metaphysics. You're saying we can't do X in metaphysics. And I'm saying, well, okay, that's a metaphysical claim.
No, I'm saying we can't do X in our current limited epistemic knowledge. We could possibly do X if we had metaphysical knowledge. We do not have metaphysical knowledge. We have epistemic, limited knowledge.
How do you know we don't have metaphysical knowledge? That's a metaphysical claim.
I don't. I can't prove that we don't. But you'd have to actually justify that claim. I can show that no form of human knowledge can justify that claim.
If you think we can't have metaphysical knowledge, you cannot tell me I cannot have metaphysical knowledge. That's a claim about metaphysics.
No, it's a burden of proof fallacy. You hold the burden of proof to justify your metaphysical claim. I can show that no form of human evidence can justify it.
Okay, you're seem to be confusing justification and absolute proof. I'm arguing for the best explanation. I'm not arguing.
I'm saying there is no best explanation. There is absolutely nothing that indicates those conclusions. 0% indication. There isn't the best explanation. They're all just unsupported completely and totally in every respect.
Again, you're making these absolute claims, and I don't see any evidence to accept these absolute claims.
Again, those are all the problems, the biggest problems in philosophy and sciences, which is why science doesn't make those kinds of claims.
Yeah, and
the same problems apply to science also apply to theology. The same reason science can't support metaphysical naturalism, theology can't support metaphysical supernaturalism or God.
Okay, well, yeah, when epistemics make that, I just invoke particularism. If you're going to make these absolute claims, you actually need to show that I should accept them. I mean, there's no reason for me to accept those absolute claims if you can't show you can justify those claims by your own standard. It's pulling the rug out right from under you.
Unless you reject all of the commonly well understood and accepted problems in every field of knowledge, then that's a justification of why you should accept my conclusion.
No, the problems in knowledge are just basically we can never absolutely prove something 100%. Doesn't mean we can't reason to something. I mean, this would be absurd if we applied this in elsewhere.
The problem isn't absolute certainty. The problem is a metaphysical absolute property. So I'm grant that you're totally fine in not saying you have absolute certainty there's a God. The problem is that you are applying absolute properties to a God. The absolute properties are what are necessarily unsupported.
What absolute properties are you referring to?
All-powerful, all-knowing, all-good, necessary divine aseity.
Where did I say that in any of my presentation?
You didn't. My first statement was an introduction. It was not a rebuttal. I was not rebutting your introduction. It was my introduction.
Well, that's why I'm asking you now because we're in the discussion part.
Right. So that was my introduction.
Cool.
That's my position. It has nothing to do with your position at all.
Okay, but this is not really addressing my arguments. You're just trying to make these absolute philosophical claims, which I reject, because again, sure, there are problems in knowledge. We can never absolutely prove something other than the fact that I exist and I'm experiencing something, but that doesn't mean we can at least reason to the best explanation. I mean, if what you're saying is true, I mean, we have to throw out dozens of scientific theories we can never absolutely prove because science doesn't deal in proof. Science doesn't even really deal in falsification anymore. If you read someone like Emery Lakatos or Paul Feyerabender, they're wonderful book called For and Against Method.
Again, you're confusing epistemology and ontology. I'm not saying the problem is absolute certainty. I grant we don't have absolute certainty. I'm totally okay with that. The problem is when you add absolute properties to a theory. All-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving. If you add those to a theory, then you require absolute certainty or they're unjustified, essentially.
No, you don't. Because you're just making an inference to the best explanation.
Because those can never be the best explanation. Those can never be the best explanation. Remember, go back to my analogy. All of the evidence of the natural world is not evidence. There is no supernatural. Why? Why is that the case?
All of the evidence, say that again?
All of the evidence of the natural world, given all of the evidence of the natural world, that does not indicate there is no supernatural. Why?
Does not indicate there is no supernatural? So all of the evidence does not indicate naturalism is true, is what you're saying?
Correct. Metaphysical naturalism.
Okay. Actual naturalists will argue from evidence in the natural world. They'll make inferences to naturalism. Sure, they understand they can't prove it. They understand they cannot prove there is no supernatural when you're a philosophical naturalist, but they still at least argue. And then the theist makes arguments, and then the naturalist makes counter arguments. We make objections. We're just arguing to the best explanation. We're not arguing for absolute certainty or that we can absolutely know or anything like that. I mean, anyone who tries to Kant, like numinal phenomenal distinction, says there's this absolute distinction, is making an absolute claim about the nominal, and that's you
didn't answer my question. You didn't answer my question. Why is all of the evidence of the natural world not demonstrative that there is no supernatural?
Okay, I was
even the metaphysical naturalists don't agree that. They all agree that there could be a supernatural out there that we haven't discovered yet. Every single one of them.
Yeah, and I agree there could not be. But again, you're trying to say this sorts of demonstrates. Like, why does the natural world not demonstrate naturalism is true? Because metaphysics, science, does not deal in absolutes. It's not dealing in absolute proof. We argue for the best explanation. When a philosophical naturalist argues for naturalism, they don't argue that they absolutely can prove this. No one claims that.
Right. So if you said there is a God, even if we had equal evidence for a God, that would not show there wasn't a greater God somewhere down the line that we haven't discovered yet, correct?
Yeah, it's possible. Doesn't mean it's probable.
Which means if you made this statement that there is the God who was uncreated and there is by definition no other God, you hold the burden of proof to try and demonstrate that, correct?
I hold the burden to show evidence, yeah.
And just like the fact that there is no evidence, all of the evidence of the natural doesn't prove there is no supernatural, doesn't even indicate there is no supernatural, the same thing applies to God. So all of these metaphysical claims are unsupported. That one's due to the problem of induction and the problem of underdetermination.
Yeah, but you mentioned the problem of induction. That does not mean we can't do induction just because there's a problem of induction. That sort of supports my point. Just because we have a problem of induction, that does not mean we still cannot make inductive arguments.
Correct. But again, you're confusing epistemology and ontology. You can't make metaphysical properties absolutes and justify those. You can't ever do it. It's not possible.
I'm not saying
that's why science never does.
I'm not saying
that's why that's why theology is wrong.
Why?
You can never support absolute properties like all powerful, all knowing, all loving. All of those are out.
Is it absolutely true theology is wrong?
No, it's absolutely true that all human knowledge can't justify those things.
Is that absolutely true?
No, that's not absolutely true. It's true based on human knowledge, the current known human knowledge.
So you're making an inference of the best explanation.
I'm making a deductive explanation of all human knowledge, which is limited.
That's exactly what I presented deductive arguments.
And none of your deductive arguments work. They all fail, and I can prove they fail by saying, oh, look, they fall into this problem, which eradicates that explanation. So that doesn't indicate anything. Because of the big problems, they prove they do not indicate your conclusion. The reason scientists don't ever make these claims is because they provably false. They do not indicate anything.
Scientists don't make these claims?
No, scientists do not add metaphysical properties to things like that.
Yes, we have to, by definition. Metaphysics has to be involved in science. That's just the basis of understanding basic philosophy of science.
No, it doesn't. Instrumentalism is one example that's just false. No, you don't. Phenomenalism is another example. You don't need to do that.
Have you read For and Against?
A.J. rejected metaphysics completely. No, you don't.
What is the basic tenets of? What are the basic parts of science?
What are the basic parts of science?
3 parts.
I would just go with some way to differentiate between our imagination and our experience. We need some methodology to demonstrate that.
If you look at philosophy of science, the basic 3 parts would be shaping principles, data, and theories. We always start with shaping principles. That's why when we look at the moon, we don't think like Aristotle did that it was an intelligent being. We all have these metaphysical prejudices. That's how we look at data. From the data, we build theories, and then theories reshape our shaping principles. Theories are conceptual, data is empirical, shaping principles are metaphysical, and they're always working in conjunction with other. This is something Emery Lakatos points out when he's responding to people like Paul Feyerabend that are anti-realists and say something that the crazy stuff that like science is art, and or Thomas Kuhn, who sort of flirts with that idea at some points. But the idea that we don't have these metaphysical prejudices in science is just not backed by philosophy of science.
Yeah, it is. It actually is. You're just wrong about that. So again, all science agrees on this. You can't ever add those metaphysical properties or your conclusion is immediately unsupported. It's why science doesn't do it. It's why theology is wrong and why everyone rejects it in science for the most part.
You keep making
add those metaphysical
claims that theology is wrong, and then you keep saying I can't make absolute claims. It's confused.
Right, because I'm not making an absolute claim about all knowledge in the universe. You are. I'm making an epistemic claim about the limited amount of human knowledge. That can be justified. Your claim about all possible knowledge, that can't be justified.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying this is the best explanation. I'm not saying that I'm making claims about absolute all knowledge.
You can't ever claim an absolute metaphysical property is the best explanation. Not supportable.
That is an absolute, though. I mean, you can't.
Nope, that's a claim about human knowledge. That is an epistemic claim about human knowledge which can be justified. Your claim cannot be justified. It can be justified.
It's an absolute metaphysical claim about what humans can do with their knowledge. That is an absolute metaphysical claim about what we can do with epistemology. It's not an epistemic claim. It's a metaphysical claim about it.
You're equivocating between 2 different kinds of metaphysics. Just ignore that. It doesn't even apply to my argument. It doesn't refute anything I've said. So again, we can justify claims about human knowledge because we have access to human knowledge. We cannot justify claims about metaphysical knowledge. We don't have access to metaphysical knowledge, except for things like I think, therefore I am.
What metaphysical...
Just arguing this is a metaphysical thing is irrelevant to the argument.
We don't have access to metaphysical evidence is what you're saying.
Correct.
That's why I gave empirical evidence. I relied on data that was presented in peer-reviewed papers, and I argued for the best explanation from that.
No form of empirical evidence qualifies as metaphysical evidence.
Okay,
category here.
That's a metaphysical claim.
No, that's an empirical claim.
That is a metaphysical claim for sure, because you can't empirically study that. You can't empirically find that. That's it. That is a shaping principle you have. You're forcing your shaping principles and trying to say
it would only be a metaphysical claim if I claimed we would never be able to. We could potentially in the future be able to, so it's not a metaphysical claim.
You said we absolutely cannot.
With the current limited knowledge we have, it would only be a metaphysical claim if I said we could never do this.
Okay, but you said earlier absolutely that we cannot have access to this. That is an absolute claim.
Only with our current human knowledge. It is not an absolute claim. It would only be an absolute claim if I said it will never be possible.
Okay, but the problem is that is such an absolute claim, and there's no reason to. There's no empirical evidence to accept.
Again, no. Again, your claim applies to all knowledge. There is a being who was not created. My claim only applies to human knowledge. This should be an obvious difference, extremely obvious. My claim only applies to human knowledge. Your claim applies to all the universe's knowledge. Your claim is unsupported. Mine is not unsupported.
I'm making metaphysical claims. I accept that. I'm arguing from the evidence to the best explanation. You're making metaphysical claims about humans are capable with our current knowledge.
No, you're equivocating language. I'm just going to say you're wrong. Stop.
I mean, my claim
My claim only applies to human knowledge. Your claim applies to all knowledge. Yours is unsupported. Mine is not unsupported. This is purely obvious. So, and we can show this by saying, just picking a different definition of maximal greatness. Like there's the Douglas Gaskin made the argument that, well, maybe the greatest of all possible being is one that can create something with the least amount of power. Therefore, the greatest being is one that can create the universe without existing. Therefore, God does not exist. Now, of course, this isn't actually an argument that there is an existing God that doesn't exist. It's just pointing out a reductio ad absurdum, that if you want to accept these definitions or these quantifiers,
the argument itself is a reductio ad absurdum because it's a contradiction.
Well, the contradiction is irrelevant to the argument. The argument is just about the definitions. You can pick a definition of maximal greatness, which is different from the definition that you're using, to get a reductio to some absurdity.
So you're separating these terms, and they're not separate. There's not maximal and greatness. It's one term, maximal greatness.
Okay, so, I'm happy to grant that.
Okay, so you don't think that our intuitions can guide us here at all?
Absolutely not. I tend to go with something like Plantinga's natural argument against evolution or evolutionary argument against naturalism and say that our intuitions are only a description of what is survivability and what has helped us survive. It tells us nothing about truth at all. We cannot use intuitions to guide us towards truth. It's just a survivable metric. And I look to history and say that people use our intuitions to think that lightning was created by Zeus. People use our intuitions to think that fairy circles were created by fairies. We use our intuition to think that objects are solid. 99% of objects is empty space. Our intuitions are not in any sense indicative of truth at all. They're just indicative of survivability.
So you think that the evolutionary argument against naturalism is successful?
In some cases, yes. I think that the way Plantinga uses it, he confuses methodological and metaphysical naturalism. But I think if you use it against the metaphysical naturalism, yes, it's successful.
Yeah. Okay. So you're not a metaphysical naturalist.
No, I'm not. Because again, my position is the Kant's noumenal phenomenal distinction. We can't know anything about the noumenal, and the noumenal is the metaphysics. So we're just completely isolated from that completely. We can say nothing about what the fundamental nature of reality really is.
This is really interesting, Tom. So I just want to encourage you. The way that you're talking about all these things, I think, is vastly different than the way that most atheists talk about these things. And I think that it would be good when you're introducing yourself to people to talk about these things, if you said something like, epistemically, I'm an atheist. I don't believe that there are any gods. I don't think there's any good arguments for gods. Ontologically, I'm an agnostic. I don't know whether there actually are any gods or are not any gods. I don't know. I think that a lot of philosophers, if you're going to dialogue with them, would understand that view a lot more, as we've been talking here for the last 45 minutes, to be a more accurate description of your own view.
Okay, so on the last one, yeah, you've rephrased the argument from ignorance to make it seem like not an argument from ignorance. I can do the same with anything like lightning.
How is it?
There's no difference. It's because we can't explain it, and you then assume it's not natural, or that it's some fundamentally different thing just because we can't explain it with the.
How is that not assuming naturalism? You're assuming the conclusion you want. It's got to be natural, or else it's an argument from ignorance.
Because everything we've discovered in the universe so far has been natural, and so we have good inductive reason that this will also be natural. Just like assuming we couldn't explain lightning 3,000 years ago. The best explanation is it's an undiscovered natural thing, not that there's a new category of reality to explain it.
So you're presupposing naturalism, and no matter what the evidence says, it has to be natural because you're presupposing naturalism.
No, I'm not presupposing anything. There is more evidence for naturalism than anything that isn't natural.
Well, you've not given any.
Science.
Science does not indicate. Science. Didn't you just say earlier that naturalists could not use the natural world to justify naturalism, and now you're saying science is justified that all that exists is natural?
No, I'm saying that we have more empirical evidence that the things that we see in the world are probably going to be explained by natural causes than a new category of thing which we have no evidence to support at all.
Okay, well, I gave evidence to support it.
Your evidence was wrong. I just proved that wrong. So do you have any other evidence?
That's the evidence. You argued from consensus with an ad populum fallacy. You confused what an appeal to ignorance is. I mean, none of these are. This is just assuming naturalism, and then when new evidence comes about, no, that can't lead to anything other than natural because we know naturalism is already true because we have all this evidence for naturalism, but I'm not going to give any because we already know naturalism is true. This is just assuming naturalism.
No, that's objectively false. It's like if we have a box and we pull out a red marble, the most reasonable conclusion is the next one's going to be a red marble. If you say it's going to be a different marble that we've never seen before, that's not evidence. Well, that's an argument of ignorance.
That's a caricature of my arguments. I would be saying that I have actually pulled out a blue marble and here's the evidence for it. Here's the I gave evidence in 3 arguments, and your only reply seems to be consensus.
Science works based on consensus. That's a valid argument.
No, science works on, as Emery Lakatos notes, science works on progressive and degenerate research programs. Every research program has a course, has an auxiliary hypothesis, which helps move it along. And these are things that kind of move things forward and backwards. There's multiple paradigms. As even Thomas Kuhn notes, scientific revolutions are basically quasi-religious. They don't happen instantly. These take times for things that we're seeing it right now in evolution. Because a lot of scientists are starting to say the modern synthesis needs to be updated. And other scientists are saying, no, it doesn't. So there's a very interesting debate happening between Evo-Devo researchers and neo-Darwinists. I mean, this doesn't happen instantly. Research programs are progressive. I would highly recommend the book For and Against Method by Emery Lakatos and Paul Feyerabend.
Right, and I just say you're wrong. Science works based on consensus. I mean, what you're just saying is just ad hoc. It's like, no.
I mean, I'm actually appealing to philosophy of science books. I don't know what to tell you, and you're just saying I'm wrong because that's ad hoc.
No, I'm saying that science works based on consensus. We know it does.
What philosopher of science has said that?
I can definitely find you some quotes and email them to you later.
I mean, yeah, consensus is very useful, but that's not how science works. If that was how science worked, we'd never change anything because the consensus would always just be like, yep, this is what we're sticking to. We would never move from geocentrism to heliocentrism. We would never have moved from thinking the entire universe was the size of our own galaxy to the vast size it is now, because consensus would have said, nope, we can't change because this guy called Albert Einstein published a paper somewhere. We can't change. That's not
as you just noted a few minutes ago, actually, it does change.
Yeah, exactly, because it's not based on consensus. It's based on evidence. It's based on shaping principles, data.
Moves the consensus. The evidence moves the consensus.
Yeah, and the paradigm is
because
shifting.
The people in the field understand the evidence better than we do.
Yeah, that's why I relied on a lot.
So it's probably a pretty reasonable conclusion to go with the consensus in the scientific fields, because they probably understand this.
Look, at the end of the day, you can believe whatever you want. You can have faith in whatever you want. I choose to follow evidence.
Because the first thing Shannon had said when she came in here to talk about this, she said, Tom's position is there is no God. And I said, whoa, and she jumped on my throat because that wasn't what he was arguing.
Stop using me to justify Tom's.
No, I'm just saying that there is confusion. You're confused. I'm confused. Ocean's confused. I still don't know what the hell Tom's ontology is. I know what happened.
But I agree with you that I don't know what Tom's ontology is.
Thank you. I can never get a straight answer.
I've never made any claims about ontology. I've never made it because I don't know what ontology is.
That's why we don't know what your damn ontology is.
You're not telling us shit about your ontology.
Because everything I said in my opening was consistent with everything I've said in every one of my other videos. It's exactly what I would normally do, just like you would expect IP to do exactly.
So you're playing hide the ball with your ontology, and then running your simple descent like an affirmative. So you're either ignorant of this, or you're being deliberately deceptive.
Or he's saying, or there's a third option that he honestly.
Exactly.
Can I finish? You honestly. There's a third option. I do believe those are two. The third one would be you honestly think that there's exactly 50% evidence for God and 50% there is no God, and you are so right on that fence that you're not even leaning either way.
My position has nothing to do with whether or not there is a God. My position is that all of the arguments...
Are you fucking kidding me? Now that's being dishonest.
If your position has nothing to do with whether or not God exists.
Tom. Straight up
Right.
dishonest.
I didn't choose the title, so you can blame. You can blame
the title. You agreed to the debate.
It's your debate.
I don't care.
Why did you agree to the debate if you didn't know what the damn debate
Oh,
was
that's
about?
fucked up.
That is.
You got two moderators here too.
Incompetence at this point.
I've had a couple of debates through modern day debate, and both of them I changed the requested title because it didn't conform to my beliefs.
Like,
yeah, and I didn't even care.
The title is
exactly what I do with every other one.
James is super transparent on the title.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what you're doing, Tom, is hide the ball ontologically. I really do think you're
you're wrong.
I gotta tell you, Tom,
I'm doing exactly what I'm saying I'm doing.
Which is hiding the ball of your ontology.
No, I say exactly what my position
All right,
is.
so let me play a little game with you. Let me play a game. And by the way, I'm doing a debate on modern day's debate on the 10th, and you guys can excoriate me to no end. Now, I've already ran some of my arguments through Dave down here, that guy. I think they're pretty solid so far. But I know what I'm getting myself into. I know what the topic of the debate is, and I know what I'm going to do. So Tom, let me ask you, propositions. Do you accept that propositions express some kind of expression for reality? If I ask you a true or false. So if I say God exists, is that statement true or is that statement false?
Sure. One or the other.
Do you see what he just did? I asked him if it's true or false, and he says one or the other. We know ontologically it's one or the other. They're contradictories. What kind of non-answer is that?
I want to continue on calling bullshit here because I've also debated IP, and in the debate with IP was super accessible. I contacted him. I asked him about the subject. I asked him what definitions that he was using. We went through what subjects that we would be debating, and we gave a basic idea of what we understood those subjects to be, and then we fucked off and studied. Like, because IP does that. He'll study forever. He plans his debates like 3 months ahead of time.
Yeah, no, he knows his shit.
And he reads up before he shows up.
Yeah, so you can tell he was prepared.
Yeah, and in the debate with me and him, he was more prepared than I was. Like, I believe that I lost that debate with him. That's one of the reasons why I respect him. And I also have like a bone to pick with him about it. But I think that I have to respect him when he shows up for a debate.
Yeah, if I lose this debate on the 10th,
the fact that Tom Jump is saying that he didn't know the title, he didn't know definitions, he didn't understand what the fuck the IP's position was, that's just you not doing your homework, and then you're saying that you wouldn't change anything.
Yeah, that's weird.
No, I would not change a thing. All the things you're saying are not criticisms of anything I did. It's all made
hell
up
they're
in your
not.
head. I represented my position exactly as I would. I represented my position. Exactly
I don't even know what your position is at this point.
Yes.
I'm so confused.
There is no evidence
You represented
God. That's my position.
You represented you represented your position well with a few inconsistencies, but my point is that in a debate, it's not just about representing yourself; it's about debating the other.
Yeah, you have another person there. That's the whole point of a debate.
That's your approach. You can take that approach.
Oh
if you
my
want.
God! Come on.
It's called debate.
It's a modern day debate channel. You're having a debate. You're not having a soliloquy. Oh my
Great.
God!
That's why we
really?
Start with our positions and then we discuss them. That's the way we do it.
I couldn't tell somebody your positions and I like to put it on it.
I mean, I've only been in 5 debates, so I mean, I'm not an expert, but shit.
Hey, Tom, I'm starting to understand why Ocean and Steve have a problem, because over the last few minutes, you've actually kind of sounded like something Steve has railed against. You sound like the atheist who confronts all theistic arguments with, well, you're just wrong.
That's what he did. He did that in the debate.
And I don't have to justify what I believe. I mean, that's what it kind of sounded like over the last few minutes.
Red, you got your hands raised,
my
by the way?
Does Red my position is that I can demonstrate they're all wrong.
We're on a different topic.
Right.
Hey, hang on, let him talk.
Go ahead.
Don't talk.
My position is that I can demonstrate they're all wrong. It's not just asserting that they're wrong.
I wonder why you didn't address his position.
I did. Those are all addressed by the academic consensus. The fact that he takes
No, that doesn't work that way.
You didn't address
it.
Other people have addressed it, but that's not that they weren't debating.
Yeah, you can't just say, "Hey, look, they did all the work. Go read something." That's not how you do debate.
Tom said a lot of stuff, but I'm not sure I got an answer to the question. What is the proper epistemology of religion? My answer is very, very simple. The proper epistemology of religion is exactly that of science, without exception. Not similar, but exactly the same. Because I think the epistemology of everything is exactly the same, and it's approximately described by Bayesian confirmation theory. And that the axioms of standard probability theory, as axiomatized by Kolmogorov or other people, are regulative ideals for degrees of belief. And so, so rather than try to untangle the stuff from Tom's opening monologue, I would like to actually hear him tell me what are some things that he thinks he knows. Oh, I didn't give my example. So, for example, I think so I'll say I know. I think I know that humans and chimps share a common ancestor. I think I know there are other planets. I think I know that there are atoms and subatomic particles. More importantly, I think it's very probably true that those things exist and behave approximately the way that contemporary physics says they do. I think chemistry is approximately correct in what it says about water boiling and things like that. I think biology is fundamentally correct in what it says about the history of evolution. And I think physics is largely correct about what it says about the atomic world and the subatomic world. And so those are examples of things I think I know. And I'm wondering if Tom thinks he knows those things.
All right, I would take the position of confusing the map and the territory. I'd say that those are descriptions of our phenomenological experience of reality, but we can't justify the claim those are in fact reality itself, like a distinction between Kant's phenomenal and noumenal. Like, I would grant that I probably believe that they are reality, but I can't demonstrate or justify that kind of a claim. Things I would say I know, you asked, like, what would I claim that I know? I know that I think, therefore I am, and I would grant things like logical truths, A equals A, law of identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle, mathematical truths, those kinds of things.
So if somebody asks me, hey, if they say, hey, do you know whether or not humans and chimps share a common ancestor? I say, yeah, I do. I do know that. What do you say? Do you know?
I would agree with that, but I'd use a different definition of no. So I would ask, do you know we're not in the Matrix? And to which pretty much every scientist would say, no, we can't know that. But science doesn't care. Science doesn't ask those kinds of capital T truth claims. Science only cares about the phenomenological.
So I think that's wrong, and I think it's not just wrong; it's clearly and almost scandalously wrong. It might be true of some physicists, but to say that it's true that generally, I think, is demonstrably false. Certainly false of the physicists that I have had physics and philosophy lunches with for, I don't know, 17 years. It's certainly false of the folks at Rochester at the Laser Institute there, where they do high energy physics. It's certainly false of the particle physicists at St. Louis University have been influenced by Jaynes. It's certainly false of there's a guy at UT that I know fairly well in condensed matter physics there. It's false for Gerald Cleaver. So I don't think that's largely true. But you're using a lot of terminology that you say things like truth with a capital T and stopping point for truth. And Tom, I got to say, I think you're flying a little high there, man. I think you need to keep it a little closer to the ground. So I'm thinking somewhere in here I've got the School of Athens and Plato's looking up to the heavens. Well, I'm an Aristotelian, man. I'm pointing straight down to the ground. And as an Aristotelian, I think, look, so Aristotle defined truth very simply in a series of monosyllabic terms so everybody could understand them. This is approximately a correct translation. He who says of that which is that it is, or of that which is not that it is not, speaks truth. He who says of that which is that it is not, or of that which is not that it is, does not speak the truth. Or as Mortimer Adler put it, it's just getting your is and your is not lined up. Okay, so truth isn't complicated. It's a very simple concept. It's basically when the subject term of your sentence, the thing that your subject term refers to, has the property that your predicate term refers to. It's just getting it right. So when you talk about stopping point for truth, I literally don't know what you mean. And I'm not trying to be coy. I'm not trying to be cute. I'm not trying to be a smart aleck. It's just stopping point for truth is not a term that I would ever use or think about using, nor is the phrase truth with a capital T. So I just don't know what you're talking about. And it bums me out because it seems like these notions are pretty fundamental to your view,
And yet, I don't have a clue what you're saying.
Are you familiar with Kant's phenomenal-noumenal distinction?
I am, but why don't you explain it to me?
All right, so the noumenal is the way reality really is, and the phenomenal is our appearance of reality, or the model of reality constructed as far as we can tell. Is that a fair definition?
I mean, I don't need some German logician, some wordy German logician to explain to me the difference between reality and appearance. I understand that there's such a thing as misleading evidence. Sometimes things aren't as they appear. Sometimes our senses are misleading. Okay, so what? I mean, guess what, Tom? I know I'm not in a matrix. I know that I share a common ancestor with chimpanzees, and I don't need some special cosmic, thing to tell me that. I read Darwinists and I read basic biology. I don't know why we got to bring Kant into it. Yeah, sometimes things aren't what they appear to be, but most of the time they are. Why think otherwise? Why don't you think you're not in the matrix? I think that's crazy.
So you said you didn't understand what I meant when I said a stopping point for truth. Well, what I meant was the noumenal phenomenal distinction. That's what I'm talking about. So the reason I brought that up was in order to explain to you what I'm talking about.
All right. Well, the concept of a stopping point for truth plays absolutely zero role in my theorizing about the epistemology of anything.
Okay.
Just zero. I mean, all I care about is about the only word you used that I was able to track was tentative. Now that I understand, because I'm a probabilist. In fact, I'm a radical probabilist. I take a lot of heat. Whoa, did you hear that thunder? Holy cow. I take a lot of heat from certain schools of epistemology because I don't believe that I can be certain of anything. Not even I think, therefore I am. Not technically certain. Okay, so I'm what's called a radical probabilist, a term that was coined by Richard Jefferies, who's kind of my philosophical hero. And so everything that I believe tentatively, but that doesn't mean I don't believe it's actually that way. I mean, technically, my belief in evolution is tentative, but that doesn't mean I don't believe it, and it certainly doesn't mean I don't know it. It just means that fallibilism is true, that knowledge doesn't entail certainty. That's actually a big part of what my dissertation was on, was the proposition that knowledge does not entail certainty. Do you think knowledge entails certainty?
Only of certain kinds of claims. So I take the science.
I didn't ask you that. I asked you if knowledge entailed certainty, Tom.
Only of certain kinds of claims. So knowledge can have different classes. I can say I have knowledge that I am imagining a unicorn. Does that require certainty? No. Do I have knowledge that we are evolved from apes and we have a common ancestor? Does that require absolute certainty? No. I can say that's empirical knowledge. I'd classify it as a certain kind of knowledge. But if I said I have knowledge that there is an all-powerful being who is by definition not created, I'd say, yep, that requires absolute knowledge. If you don't have it, it's unjustified.
Why?
Because
first of all, you said absolute knowledge. I asked you about certainty. You see, I'm
using those as synonyms.
I'm really good at telling when the words change.
I'm using those as synonyms, so you can take them as the same thing. So like you mentioned earlier, you said
in your terminology, absolute knowledge means what?
Like absolute certainty. So absolute knowledge, absolute certainty. So going back to what you said earlier.
Okay, simple question. Why think that? Why all of a sudden, when it gets to a claim you don't like, does certainty required for knowledge? And guess what? I already said I don't care about knowledge. Okay, fine. You don't want me to know that God exists because I can't be absolutely certain? Okay, fine. I don't care. I don't need knowledge for anything.
So I don't think that the divide between the noumenal and the phenomenal is nearly as stark as you think that it is. I think that we do have access to things about ultimate reality. I think that you're reasoning towards something like naturalistic pantheism, towards a necessary being. You are making an ontological claim there that there needs to be some underlying ground. You're not just saying, for all I know. You're actually reasoning about the cosmos or the cause of the cosmos. And I think it's good reasoning. I think it's valid. I also think that when you reason that 2 + 2 = 4, that's a metaphysical, ontological claim. It's not just a, well, in this world, in the way that we see it, who knows if that's true or not. And I think the same way that you would want to reason about the laws of logic themselves and the existence of the law of non-contradiction, that you can't have contradictory states of affairs that obtain at the same place in the same time. Those are statements not just about the phenomenal realm. They're statements of truth that are universal, and they're seem to be unrestricted in the way. I don't want to say like, well, the law of non-contradiction. Well, it's true in the actual world as I understand it phenomenologically, but who knows if it's true somewhere else. At least when I'm talking about the law of non-contradiction, I'm certainly not talking about it that way. Do you understand yourself to be talking about the law of non-contradiction and mathematical truths, not as ontological realities, but merely from an epistemic perspective of phenomenology?
Correct. My position on math and logic is that reality exists and reality is the way reality is. And then we have created these languages of math and logic to describe the way reality is.
Okay, but even the statement not prescriptive. Even the statement that you just made is not a claim about your appearance. Reality is the way that reality is. That's a metaphysical claim.
Well, I would go with Descartes and say that I would reject the possibility of even like 1 + 1 = 2, because there could be an evil deceiver and I could be wrong even about that. So I wouldn't say that even those are necessarily metaphysical claims. Those are claims about the phenomena, about the world we experience.
Metaphysical claim. You're saying that it could be this other way. You're making a claim about modality. You're making a claim about what could be and what could not be. That is a metaphysical claim.
Right. I'm happy to say that metaphysics could be any way. The point that we can't make any claims about metaphysics is that we can't say it is one way, because it could always be any other way. And so my position about, you said the
you
necessary
don't think
thing.
it could be any way. You don't think that it could exist in a logically contradictory way. You don't think it could be the case that we are both talking and not talking at the same time, do you?
Oh, right. I say that logic is a description of the way reality is. So I don't think that reality can be not reality.
Do you think it's a true description of the way reality is? Or is it just a phenomenal? Is it a new?
I consider those to be the same thing. The true isn't like a capital T true. It's just a phenomenal true. It's true insofar as we can tell, it's true to our minds or how our brains work. But I would not go so far as to say that logic is fundamental, is metaphysical part of a reality. It's not. It's just a language. It's just a language. That's it. You asked what reason is there to justify the claim that you need absolute knowledge for claims of what I call stopping points for truth, right?
Yeah.
All right. So it's what you said earlier. Your quote about you must proportion your belief to the evidence. Don't remember exactly what you said, but I believe it was the Laplace one.
It's the gist.
Right. So if you're making a claim of like something being all powerful or uncreated, you need absolute knowledge. Like if I claimed there was a being who knows absolutely everything, then I would need to know absolutely everything to know there's not something he doesn't know.
Well, I think that is a fallacy. I think that's a non sequitur. I see zero reason to believe that the content, just because the content of the belief has an infinity in it, that doesn't mean the evidence needs to. If somebody tells me that there's a aleph naught number of fundamental particles, I'm going to say, oh, that's an interesting claim. Why do you think that? And then they'll give an argument, and we'll go back and forth. But I'm not going to say to somebody, oh, you postulate, countably many particles. Well, you're going to need infinite evidence for that. It's just an absolute non sequitur to go from an infinity in the content to an infinity in the evidence. It's just an absolute non sequitur.
Right, I agree, and that's not what I'm saying. So I'm saying what requires the infinite evidence to say there is an alpha null number of particles, but there is not an alpha null plus 1 number of particles. That's the claim that requires the infinite evidence, because then you have to take all of the alpha null and then know everything outside of the alpha null and so there's nothing there. You're claiming to have absolute knowledge there and say there is not an alpha null plus 1 anywhere. That requires absolute certainty. That's an absolute claim.
Why? Why does that require absolute certainty? I mean, because it almost sounds like you're saying that the reason why, because sometimes people will say you have to have omniscience to make a negative existential claim, which you really don't. But I really want to hear you explain this, because it makes absolute zero sense to me that this kind of claim would require some kind of absolute evidence. It's a non sequitur. There's no like law proportioning. There's a law proportioning strength of belief to strength of evidence, but not strength of evidence to like scope of claim. I mean, anytime anybody makes a negative existential claim, they're sort of, in a sense, claiming to know all of reality. If I say there's no crows that are purple with pink spots, well, guess what? I mean, technically, I've made a claim about everything that exists, but I don't need some kind of special evidence for that. In fact, I don't need anything special evidence-wise for that. In fact, I dare say, Tom, I claim right now, live in front of everybody, there are no purple crows with pink polka dots.
And do you have absolute knowledge of that?
I don't know what absolute knowledge is.
Then I would say no. You cannot say you have. Right? Yeah.
No, I don't know. I'm not. I just told you I'm a fallible.
Right. So then that would not fit the definition of no I'm using. You have a lowercase k no. You don't have the capital K no.
I don't care about the case.
Right.
At all. And I didn't claim to have it. The question, Cameron's question to us wasn't like, what does it take to capital K no? It was, what is the proper epistemology of religion?
Right, and from my perspective, in order to justify claims, since religion entails a God and God has omni properties, you need to be able to justify those.
Entail a God. Atheism or Buddhism is atheistic.
Correct. I'm specifically, when referring to religion, I'm jumping to the conclusion of the Abrahamic theistic religions, because that's usually the content of the show.
Have finite God versions of them.
Sure. I mean, the Pastafarianism is technically a religion, and Satanism is technically a religion, at least by politics.
You don't need an infinite God to raise Jesus Christ from the dead.
Correct. You don't need an infinite God to have a designer to the universe. So that's not
great.
The claims I'm saying.
Let's leave that out of it. Let's say I'm a finite goddess.
That would be great. I am totally okay with that. That would just completely accept everything about my introduction, because all I said was that we have to be a fideist about those omni properties. That was the conclusion of my intro.
But that's not the summation of religion. I think that's highly misleading to say that's your main point, because the question was, what's the proper epistemology of religion? Because I mean, look, I think Jesus rose from the dead. I think I can defend that to a very high degree of probability, such that anybody who doesn't believe it, well, something went wrong somewhere. You okay with that?
That would be the second half of my epistemology. My introduction only presented the first half.
Okay. Holy cow, that was just the first half. All right. Give me the second half then.
So the second half is that there's some difference between our imagination and our experience. And you have to show there's whatever you're explaining isn't of the imagination, is of the experiential kind of thing, the internal external kind of distinction. So I would reject that your claim that you can show with any probability that Jesus rose from the dead. I would say there is no evidence of that at all.
Why?
Because testimony doesn't qualify as evidence of anything that lacks an empirical basis. So I mean, miracles, magic, mythical creatures, the paranormal, supernatural, UFOs, no amount of historical testimony will justify any of those things.
So you know that movie Princess Bride?
Yes, the one with.
Do you remember?
You keep using that word, but I do not think you know what that word means.
That's right. I'm like Inigo Montoya talking to Vizzini. You keep using this word. I don't think it means what you think it means. I mean, you talk about empirical. What do you mean by that?
Right, I'm talking about my distinctions and stuff that I've written into my epistemology. So I'm using.
Yeah. Okay. Well, tell me about it. What do you mean by the word empirical?
Verifiable through sense experience.
Which senses?
What? Which? The sense experience of the five senses that we have? Are there others?
I think so. So tell me this. You mentioned that you believe, do you believe the transitive property? You gave some mathematical example, but I forget what it was.
Right. A equals B, B equals C, therefore A equals C.
Yeah, you believe that?
Yes.
Why?
Because it's true by definition.
True by definition? Why do you believe it's true by definition?
Because logic is a formal language, so it's literally...
Why? Well, it doesn't follow from logic being a formal language that that's true by definition. That's a non sequitur.
It's true by definition because logic is a formal language, and we've defined it in such a way that it means that. That's how it is a description of how we think.
That sounds circular. It sounds like you're defining modus ponens thusly. If modus ponens is part of formal logic, then it's reliable. Modus ponens is a form of formal logic, therefore it is reliable. That's absolutely circular.
All claims of knowledge are either circular, infinite regress, or dogmatism of Grippus Relimus, so that's not a problem. As long as epistemic circularity, what's his name? Alston.
Bergman.
William Alston, I think.
Yeah. So say that again. All knowledge is what?
Either circular reasoning, infinite regress, or dogmatism, brute fact. Or dogmatism would entail brute fact and metaphysical necessity.
So which of those is the proposition that humans and chimps share a common ancestor? Is that circular, regress, or dogmatic?
I'm not sure. I'd have to think about it.
Well, we got time.
I'd have to take a great deal of time to really process through the information and go through the foundations of science and which one it is.
Well, forgive me for saying this, but I think that's a problem with your epistemology that you can't label that. I mean, we're talking about evolution, man.
Right.
I mean, just to be sure, just to be absolutely sure to get this off the table. Are you a creationist?
No.
Okay.
Existence seems to be the kind of property that we would say is good for the kinds of instrumental reasons that you've antecedently said, yeah, I'm on board with this much.
Right, I would agree that existing is instrumentally good for other instrumentally good things, but I wouldn't say it's intrinsically good.
Okay, that's fine. I think you can still have a successful modal ontological argument with that.
So to go back to the modal ontological argument, I would still say that maximally great is an arbitrary term, and we could just make up a different definition of maximally great. And if you wanted to show that this actually indicated what you're using to define the term to mean, you would have to show that the alternative definitions are not what reality actually agrees with. So like a reality could adopt the what's his name, Gasking's definition of that the greatest possible being is one that can create the universe without existing. Maybe that's the one reality actually likes the best, as opposed to your.
But that's a contradiction.
Well, that doesn't make a difference to the argument because it's just a reductio. The point is just
an argument cannot be a successful reductio if there is a contradiction in the argument before you actually get to the reductio. Okay, the only way that you can have a successful argument is that the reductio itself finishes with the non-existent. And no one is going to agree that a maximally great being is one that does not exist.
Oh, right, I'm totally agreeing with you. I'm showing that using your logic of saying if a maximally great being exists, and we can use this structure of the argument to indicate a logical contradiction. The problem isn't with the logical contradiction. The problem is with the structure of the argument.
Very good. So I'm gonna not talk about maximal greatness then anymore. I'm gonna use the premise that you gave. You agreed possibly God exists.
Right, and I would say possibly is also one of those imaginary things. Like possibility, either something exists or it doesn't exist. Those are the only options. Possibility is just a measure of human ignorance. Does it exist or doesn't exist? We don't know.
No,
so possibility from my position.
And now you're contradicting stuff that you said earlier, right? With the whole way where we spent time talking about the framework of the metaphysics of modality and possible worlds and the approach to this. Now what you're saying is you're not in agreement with that.
How so?
Because you're now saying that possibility is just a measure of human ignorance. No. Possibility means there is a possible world that's free of any logical contradiction. That's what possibility means. So I'm going to ask, because there's two contradictory claims being made here. On the one hand, standard modal metaphysics, to say that something is possible is not a measure of ignorance or whatever. It's to say that there is a state of affairs that's free of any logical contradiction. That's one option. Another option is to say that possibility is just a measure of human ignorance. One is an ontological claim that you said you were on board with. Now you're making an epistemic claim. They're not the same thing. So I need to know which one it is.
All right. So I don't really understand the difference necessarily between those two. Like from my perspective, when you say a possibility is a world that doesn't have any logical contradictions, that means it's a possible thing we could imagine being the case.
No, not quite. I think we would want to say that a possible world means that there is a state of affairs, okay? And whether or not the state of affairs is actualized or not actualized is not the question that we're interested in right now. That's the debate between the modal concretists and the modal realists. We're interested in just what is that state of affairs that's possible. And to say that it's possible means ontologically that there are no logical contradictions in it. To say it's a measure of human ignorance or something like that is to make an epistemic claim that for all we know, there's no logical contradiction, but maybe there is one that we haven't discovered yet. Okay, I'm stipulating X hypothesized by definition, right? A possible world, if it is genuinely possible, does not have any logical contradictions, whether we know about them or not. Okay? If there's a known logical contradiction, then obviously it's not a possible world. if there's an unknown logical contradiction, it's also not a possible world. In order to qualify as a possible world, there cannot be any logical contradictions in it.
All right. I think I see where we're going past each other on this. So when I'm saying it's possible, like the measure of human ignorance, I'm talking about the concretist versus the modal realist kind of distinction. I'm saying that yes, that would fit the definition of a possible world in a modal realist sense, but that world isn't actual. So I'm arguing that yes.
How can you know that? How can that is a metaphysical claim that you're making?
Right. So I let me amend that. I'd say we have no reason to believe that world is actual as opposed to any other possible world.
Very good. I'm on board with you there. I am on board with you that we don't have any reason to know whether that world has been actualized or not.
Right. So I'm arguing that
with issues.
So it's possible that there is a world with. You said you didn't want to use maximally great being, but so it's possible there's a world where there's a maximally great being.
No,
but that world could be one of the non-actualized.
I'm not using terms maximal great. All I'm saying is there's a possible world where God exists.
Okay, so I would say that the possible world that God exists may not be the actual world.
Well, no, if there's a possible world where God exists, then part of what it means to be God is that you would exist at all possible worlds. And the actual world is a possible world. We know that because here we are, right? So if there is a world, even one world, a possible world where God exists, that's something that you have conceded, then if that one world, it doesn't have to be an actual world, it can just be a possible world. God exists in that world. Well, if God exists in that world, then a God who's properly God would exist in all worlds. Therefore, God exists in this world.
Right. Happy to grant all of that. So I'm just going to go in and change.
Right.
Right. So I agree with all of that, but I can show that doesn't work because I can just change the definition of God from like a theistic God to a deistic God or a polytheistic God or a pantheistic God, the naturalistic pantheism.
Hang on.
Change the definition of God to mean.
That's not quite right. I want to go back to something that I said, and unfortunately, I'm going to need to go here in 5 or 10 minutes. I want to go back to something that I said at the very beginning, which is that these kinds of natural theological projects, it's not clear to me that they get you to the God of the Bible, right? I believe in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And I believe in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. I believe Genesis 1 and John 1. The God that the biblical authors are talking about, I think Yahweh exists. And I just so happen to believe that the God of the philosophers is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? Convenient for me, right? But I'm not trying to say that there's any particular definition about God that's here. So the maneuver of playing this game of 3-card Monty where you're wanting to shuffle things around doesn't absolve the idea that if possibly God exists, then God exists. If you're on board with leading theorists in modal metaphysics. Now, what that God is, what is the divine nature? Well, that's a whole secondary question, but it's not the same thing as whether or not God exists.
Well, I'm happy to grant it if you're just using it in the vague way where God can mean essentially anything. And then I would just use what I followed up with what you said with, I said, it could just be naturalistic pantheism and a necessary, eternal, all-powerful nature without consciousness. And if you want to call that a God, I'm happy to grant that and say, yep, I'll grant the ontological argument works equally as well for pantheism as it does for theism.
Well, I mean, there are people who say that negative existential claims have in their scope literally everything that exists, which is in a certain respect true.
Right.
But look, I can say there's no Santa Claus, and I don't need like some sort of special infinite quantum evidence of that, man. I just know there's not a Santa Claus. There's nothing special about it.
Right, and then going along with that, the universal existential negative kind of thing says, actually you do. Actually, you do need to show there isn't a Santa Claus hiding down somewhere in Alpha Centauri that you just don't know yet.
I don't need to show that at all. Have you heard of prior probabilities? They're awesome.
Yes, I have, and I've heard of the problem of the priors too.
Okay. So, but if without priors, you can't really do much of anything. And so you don't have to.
I disagree with that.
You don't always have to like show that Santa's not hiding on the dark side of the moon. you can assess the antecedent probability of that, and it doesn't even rise to the level of needing to be, ruled out, man.
Well, that's for the part earlier you said you can't be absolutely certain about anything, even I think, therefore I am. I definitely disagree with you on that aspect. Like, I would say, yes, we can, especially with I think, therefore I am. Like, I mean, would you say that there is some probability that you can square root a pork chop? Is there a probability there?
There's a probability greater than 0 that my concept of squaring or pork chop is like some evil demon has, deceived me on what those terms mean. But so what? I don't need certainty for anything ever.
Okay, so how could an evil demon stop you from the I think, therefore I am thing? How can you not have certainty with that?
I'm saying that I don't have absolute certainty.
Right. I'm saying, how do you not have
absolute about the meaning of the words?
Okay, I guess that's possible, but if we say that that's just the language, ignore the language and assess just the conclusion, like, how can I believe I exist and be wrong?
Because the probability is greater than 0 that my concept of existence is mistaken, that I've just gotten confused somehow.
Well, my concept of existence is just the thinking. So the fact that I think means I exist. Those are synonymous, essentially, a tautology.
They're not at all, because people can exist without thinking. They're not even close to synonymous.
Right. There could be more to existence than thinking, but thinking is an aspect that demonstrates existence. So there are.
Well, that's still not. That's not synonymy.
Not all flowers are roses. Not all, but all roses are flowers.
Yeah, that's got nothing to do with what we're talking about.
All thinking is existing. You can't think and not exist. Even if you can exist and not think, you can't think and not exist.
We're agreed on that. My point is that I don't have any need to be certain about that. I can admit that there's some non-zero probability that somehow some malevolent demon is deceiving me about that, about the very meaning of the terms of my very thoughts, because it takes time to think the thought, and so a demon could be changing, my memory about what the terms mean, or what I said 5 seconds ago, or what the beginning of the sentence was like. But look, my whole point is it doesn't matter that there are possibilities like that. It doesn't make me a skeptic. I know that I think, and I know that I exist, and I know that thinking entails existing. I don't need certainty for any of those things. And I know I'm not in the Matrix, and I know that humans and chimps share a common ancestor, and I know that God exists, and I know that Jesus rose from the dead, and I know there's a heaven. And these are just claims that I assess in the same way that I assess every other claim. I don't need the distinction between appearance and reality is meaningless to this. The fact that Kant gave fancy names to that distinction that was in Plato 1700 or 2000 years before that doesn't mean anything. I don't need appearance to guarantee its truthfulness about reality to believe on the basis of appearances how reality is.
Will and consciousness are essentially synonymous. I'm happy to grant that. So my response would be is that the reason God used his will to create the universe at some particular time is determined by his nature. There's something in his nature independent of his will that determines his will to do this. And I can just get rid of the will and say there's something in pantheism's nature which determines it to do this at a particular time, just like there's something in God's nature which determines him to do this at some particular time.
So, but now there's a contradiction in terms here, right? The pantheism stuff, because on pantheism, like, God is identical with the totality of the universe, and God is everywhere, right? But what we're saying is that this stuff used to not exist. And now you're saying that there must have been something that preceded the existence of that thing. Well, that's God. And whether or not that being is conscious or unconscious, and that's the stuff I'm trying to point you to. Go look at Peter Forrest or Andrei Bukharev or other people who are wanting to develop, or Spinoza himself, right? Non-personal conceptions of the divine. That's not my view of things, and I think that you're going to run into problems, even some of them that we've been discussing here. But that's not the same thing as saying there are no gods, right?
Right, I'm happy to grant that. If you want to say that a non-personal thing qualifies as a god, then I can grant that. I'm okay.
Because you have to talk about something that is not the universe, that is not part of the universe, that is responsible for the universe. Now, on naturalism, the only stuff that exists is the universe. But you would have to postulate something that is supernatural, something that is not part of the natural universe.
No, that's the part I'm rejecting. So there's our universe. Our universe had a beginning. and only our universe, only the space and time and matter that can be measurable in general and special relativity.
Right. What accounts for the beginning of that universe?
More natural stuff.
No.
That's what I'm saying.
I mean, we don't have any evidence for that.
Correct. We don't have any evidence for God. Those are on equal footing.
No, I've given you quite a bit of evidence for God.
Right, and I can match that one for one and show it works for the pantheism equally as well as it does for theism.
But that's still a God.
Well, I'm happy to grant that. I'm happy to grant. So it doesn't. So if you want me to be more particular,
at this point, what you need to say is this: we have evidence that it's either God 1 or God 2, but we have zero evidence for no gods.
I'm happy to grant that. We can say there's evidence for either an unconscious, non-personal God or a personal God, and I would say no evidence indicates one way or the other, and I'm happy to grant that.
Okay, but that's not the same thing as atheism. Even on either one of these, you have to say that there is something that accounts for this universe that is not part of this universe. It's supernatural. So you're not a naturalist. You're a supernaturalist.
Well, I think natural things can exist outside of the universe. So I wouldn't say it's supernatural.
So no, this is just an error of simple set theory. Whatever the largest scope of what there is, that is the universe, right? So this universe, and we want to talk about parallel universes and all this. This is why we need to make distinctions about universes versus possible worlds. But if you're wanting to say that this universe exists rests on something else that's more fundamental, right? Okay, then what does that rest on? And are you going to end up with turtles all the way down? And that's just very not satisfying. That's infinite regress. So we need something that's going to finally put a stop to that on pains of violating principles of sufficient reason, right? So God 1 or God 2, either one of those are options. But here's what's not an option. No God. Other natural stuff. Okay, where's that come from? Well, more natural stuff. That's very unsatisfying.
Right. So my response would be is that just like you believe that there is some property of a God that's necessary, eternal, all powerful, I can say those can be natural properties we just haven't discovered yet. They're not supernatural. They're just more natural, undiscovered stuff.
Well, in order to count as natural, they have to be part of the universe. They can't be transcending the universe. That's how we define natural versus supernatural. The stuff that's in the universe is the stuff that's natural. The stuff that's not in the universe, if there is any, that's what would count as supernatural. So for you to say that there is stuff that's not part of the universe, well, by definition, that's not natural.
Well, I think this is going back to where we don't really have a solid definition or distinction between natural and supernatural, because I'm going with the physics definitions here. In physics, the universe is our universe and only our universe. And as soon as you go behind the Big Bang, it's not our universe anymore. There's like the multiverse is not our universe. The cyclic universe is not our universe. String theory is not our universe. Our universe is just...
Yeah, and postulating all that stuff, that's just science of the gaps. Just like, oh, well, we think there's a scientific explanation for this. We just don't know what it is or whatever. Science of the gaps. Okay, if people want to do that, that's fine. I don't think it's rational any more than it is for God of the gaps stuff. If it's an inference to the best explanation, then that's fine. So, yeah.
So yeah, that's essentially what I'm doing is I'm taking the science of the gaps and just adding in the godlike properties of necessary, eternal, all powerful, and just calling them, well, these can be natural too. You don't need the supernatural stuff. So you're right. I'm doing the exact same thing as a god of the gaps here.
But oh, absolutely. It's terrible reasoning, but
yes, it is on both sides.
No, it's not, because I'm not doing God of the gaps. I'm not saying, well, we don't have any explanation of this, so it must be God. I'm saying universes began to exist. All things that begin to exist are caused to begin to exist. Therefore, the universe was caused to exist. What could account for that? Has to be a decision of the will. Why do we know that? Because there's nothing else that could obtain if it was necessary in sufficient conditions that would have happened infinitely long ago. The universe has not been around for an infinitely long period of time. We have good reasons for thinking this. It's not God of the gaps reasoning.
Well, my argument is that I can match everything you said one for a naturalist explanation and show it as equally as plausible under a naturalist.
No, it's not natural. It's not natural because there are things that are transcendent of the universe. That's not natural.
So again, I think we need to clear up the definition of natural and supernatural sometime. But I'm just mean as opposed to a conscious personal being, we can show a non-conscious, what I would call natural non-God thing could explain all of this.
So the only difference between these two beings is consciousness, right?
Yes. So it just has no mind.
So consciousness is the property that makes something supernatural. So you're a supernatural being because you're conscious and I'm conscious. So I'm supernatural. on your account that you've just given, the only difference between the two beings, one counts as supernatural and the other one doesn't, is the property of consciousness. Now, you have just given so much power to every conscious being because they can now say, I'm a supernatural being. That's really interesting entailment of your view, but I don't think it's right.
Well, I think that consciousness, as we can understand it in material human beings, is a product of the brain. So if we're talking about a consciousness that is outside of the universe, that is not a product of material forces, then I would classify that as supernatural, and I don't think it has that. So those are two different things on my view.
Well, I understand. So you think consciousness is an emergent property too?
Correct.
Okay.
I don't want to assume. Are you a physicalist in regards to human beings?
I don't hold to an ontology. So my view is just strictly epistemological. I think, therefore I am, and then I can start describing things from this way. That's it. So I don't actually, like I said before, it could be the case that I am a product of reality and that my consciousness is a material process, or it could be the case that consciousness and material are two separate things, like dualism, or it could be the case that reality is a product of my mind, or mind in general, like idealism or solipsism. But I don't take a position on any of those because none of those are relevant to my point. All I need to know is that I think, therefore I am, because whichever one of those is the case, you still get the same result either way. There is still some difference between my imagination and my experience in all three cases. The same difference exists. I can still say it appears to me I'm holding a cup, and it's still true in all three cases. So regardless of which ontology is the case, materialism, dualism, idealism, theism, pantheism, whatever, I still get all the same stuff I've talked about. So no matter how you change the ontology, all of my epistemology is unaffected. It's still true.
Yeah, I guess I'm having difficulty because unless the world is a particular way, in other words, would you say the world, reality is such that we can know things about reality?
Well, yeah, I think, therefore I am. That does tell me stuff about reality.
Right, but that doesn't seem to just be epistemologically related. That seems to assume some kind of ontology.
What do you mean? Because from my perspective, it doesn't assume any kind of ontology. Like it's ontology invariant. So no matter how you change the ontology, that statement is still going to be true no matter what.
And I genuinely, maybe you could help me understand this. How does that position not presuppose any ontology when you acknowledge that?
Oh, I apologize. Let me clarify. It does presuppose there is an ontology, but it doesn't tell us what that ontology is. So it could be materialism, it could be dualism, it could be idealism, it could be infinitely many possible things. It does presuppose, I guess, there is an ontology. It doesn't tell us what the ontology is. So it doesn't presuppose a particular ontology, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yes, but I guess I'm confused. Is that in other words seems to say you have no idea what the nature of reality is? And
correct.
That's what you're saying. I'm challenging whether you could actually know what you say you know to actually be the case. I mean, you believe that nature is such that we can come to know certain things, and that seems to be an ontological commitment. And it becomes difficult to critique since I don't have enough information. I don't even know what I'm critiquing because on key issues, which is fine. I mean, we don't know everything, of course. On key issues that would be helpful to me in furthering this kind of discussion, you're just undecided. So this would probably be, if we weren't having this discussion, I'd probably want to hang out with you a little more and kind of hash those things out with you, which I'm not sure we'll cover in the next 20 minutes.
Well, yeah, so my position is just I think, therefore I am. That is the ultimate starting point. And regardless of what the ontology is, regardless of whether or not I'm a materialist, dualist, idealism, nothing can change that. It can't make it false. Like I can't believe I exist and be wrong. It's not possible. It doesn't matter how you change the ontology.
Right. It just seems to be that there needs to be some ontological context in which that statement is meaningful. And that's where I feel as though there's a little, and I don't mean this, insulting. I think there's a little waffling going on. Is that I exist, but I don't know what that means. I exist. It's like, well, I mean, some more information would be helpful in terms of hashing that out because I'm having difficulty seeing how we can understand what existence is without an ontological context in which existence can be defined. Because I grant, from my worldview perspective, I presuppose my own existence, and I think it's foolish to deny my own existence. I understand that. But I have proximate starting points and ultimate starting points. My proximate starting point is my own mind, because I actually have to think about stuff in order to even reason. But my ultimate starting point is the ontological truth of the Christian worldview, which gives context and meaning for the idea of existence. And so that's why if there is no ontological commitment, to be honest, I wouldn't even know where to start since there's not enough information in regards to what you think about existence because you don't know what the I is. You say that it can be an infinite number of things, and it would be difficult to further the conversation at that point on this particular topic.
Well, right. So my position is just starting with that and saying just that one fact without saying anything about ontology. I can get intelligibility. I've got everything I need right there. So why do I need to say anything about ontology? Like ontology isn't even relevant at this point.
Yeah, no, I think it is. I think it is relevant. I think it's people who I speak to, and I'm not accusing you by any means of doing this because I mean I just met you, so I don't know about you in that way. But there are people who have ontological commitments, but they don't voice their ontological commitments because it would give them a burden of proof that they don't want. And so I'm not sure if you're doing that, and I'm going to grant that you're not because you seem like a cool guy, and I really do respect this conversation. But it can be used as a tricky move to make one's own position evasive. And if that's the case, then it becomes difficult to communicate since I don't know where you stand on certain points and I have insufficient information to actually give my thoughts on that particular area. So if you don't know what your ontology is, then maybe we can continue a conversation later on, maybe over the phone, we can talk a little bit more about that and then kind of continue from there. And that's okay if you think, well, I don't know what my ontology is and I don't know if I'll ever know. But that's something that we can continue on later since we're not going to get anywhere because I think I don't have sufficient information to dig a little deeper because I'm not sure you have your worldview worked out in that sense. Although you have your epistemology there, I think that it's connected to the ontology issue.
So I really want to. I mean, I want to do this just like it was a graduate seminar. I want to understand your conclusion, and I want to understand your reasoning for your conclusion. The conclusion appeared to me to be that no appearance can justify a belief in any reality.
So just to clarify, I'm not saying that our experiences are necessarily not descriptive of reality. I'm saying they
no,
could.
I didn't. No,
I'm just clarifying.
Every time I ask a question, you go off into la la land.
So my justification is the exact same as Descartes, the exact same as Kant, the exact same as everyone who did that, who shows that the fundamental nature of reality may not be the same as our perceptions. All models are wrong. They're only probabilistic and useful. Truth isn't even a concept.
Probabilistic, I can get, okay? But look, the concept of probability is probability of truth. We say of scientific hypotheses, they're probably true. That's what probably means, is probably true. There's no such thing as like just probably. Probably means probably true. And true means as it is in reality. And experiences are our guide to reality. They're not infallible guides by any means. Sometimes they lead us astray, but they are the only guides we have. And I take it for the most part, they're fairly accurate because I take it for the most part, the things that scientists teach us are mostly accurate.
Right. So
do you not believe that? Do you not believe that most of science is at least basically accurate?
It's an accurate description of our apparent reality. You can't say it's an accurate description of reality.
There's no such.
To quote George Box, for such a model, there's no need to ask the question, is the model true? If truth is by the whole truth, the answer is no. The only question of interest is the model illuminating and useful? Truth isn't a part of the question in science. There is no absolute truth in science. We don't even care.
That is a view called anti-realism. It is a minority view. It is not the view of most scientists, and I want to know why you believe it.
Because
why
most
are you an anti-realist?
Trying to point me as an anti-realist in some sense. No, I'm like most scientists. Most scientists admit, yes, we could be in the matrix. That's totally fine. We don't care about this kind of absolute truth that you're talking about.
I didn't say anything
about it. It's a different category thing.
Didn't say anything about absolute truth. You appear to me to be saying that appearances can't justify even that appearances cannot make probable claims about reality. That's exactly what it sounded like you were saying, man. Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I'm not sitting here trying.
I've tried to explain this to you multiple times, and you keep.
Look.
There's a distinction. I make a distinction between two kinds of knowledge.
If you keep
tentative
saying
knowledge.
The same words, I'm not gonna just like get it through repetition. Try saying it in some different words, like without using the words absolute truth or, without. Just try using different words. Maybe I'll get it if you use different words.
So let me give you a different example. Do you think it would be reasonable to believe we do not exist in the matrix, that what we experience is reality itself?
Oh yeah, quite. I mean, because this is contradictory to various other things, I think it's reasonable to believe that you don't. But yes.
What do you mean contradictory to other things?
Oh, I'm just going to go Descartes' basic route, and that God wouldn't let us be so completely deceived in this fashion.
Okay, so from the perspective of a materialist who says, I believe we are not in the matrix and there is no God, do you think that would be a reasonable position for them to have?
No.
Why not?
There's absolutely no way of eliminating such a thing.
All right, so in philosophy, the consensus, in philosophy and science, the consensus is fallibilism. I would really love for you to take a look at like the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on it, or do some research, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on it, because the consensus right now is that we can be certain, even as a materialist, we can know that we are not in the matrix. And the justification for that is the position of fallibilism, that if some belief has justification, and if that belief happens to be true, then it can be called knowledge, even if we can't be certain it's knowledge. So even if we don't have infallible knowledge of it, it can still be knowledge. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that position in philosophy, because it's really interesting, and I think that's the fundamental difference we have in our positions, is that from my position, we can know things like that an electron isn't conscious and that we're not in the matrix and that electrons don't have feathers, because of the fallibilistic knowledge that we are allowed through the justifications of philosophy. And I would very much like to hear your thoughts on that if you have time to look into it sometime.
Okay.
So apparent reality, that's just got to be, appearance. That's just another word for appearances. Reality is the world out there independent of my mind. And when my descriptions of reality are accurate, they're true. Truth is not some mysterious thing. It's just it's like as boring as grammar.
Truth is not a mysterious thing, yet truth is like one of the most mysterious things in all of philosophy. Yes, it is.
Well, I mean, I just don't know people. I don't know people in philosophy who really think that. I mean, most people hold a deflationary theory of truth, in which truth is actually fairly boring. I mean, truth is awesome in having it, but the concept of truth is very simple and in many ways very boring.
Like Gettyer's problems. That
has nothing to do with truth.
Justified true belief, and how justified true belief doesn't qualify as knowledge.
The definition of truth has nothing to do with the definition of truth. The definition of truth that I accept is, and its connection to claims, is the one I quoted from Aristotle earlier. It's when your description of the world is accurate, when the world is the way your words describe it as being. That's the only concept of truth I know. And the only way I know of forming beliefs about the mind-independent world is through the experiences I have of it. But I hear, and I'm a fallibilist, I'm a probabilist, a radical probabilist, and so I think that all of our beliefs that we form about, I'm an Aristotelian, all knowledge comes through the senses, and so I believe that our beliefs about the world are only probably true, like we can never be certain, absolutely certain of them, but I do think that there can be probable enough to know things. And again, not about apparent reality. Probably means probably true. If somebody were to say to you, do you think it'll rain today? And I say probably, and you say, but do you think it will rain? And I'm like, what are you talking about? That's nonsense. Yes, I just told you, I think it probably will rain. So the concept of probability is anchored to the concept of truth, and I think scientific claims are probably true, and that experiences give us evidence that makes probable claims about the world. And what I want to know from you that I can't seem to get is, do you or do you not think that some experiences make probably true claims about the world itself?
No. In the way that you mean it, no. In order to have a probability, you need a numerator and a denominator. The numerator is all of our knowledge. The denominator is nothing. There is nothing that goes in the denominator for the reality.
What are you talking about? There's no reality? What?
We don't have any access to true reality, the noumenal. We cannot put anything in the denominator to come up with a probability in that way. No.
I don't understand the numerator-denominator thing, but you made a concrete claim about the noumenal. Could you repeat that claim about the noumenal, please?
Which one?
The one you just made. You said something about we can't have any knowledge of the noumenal.
We don't have any access to any knowledge of the noumenal. There's nothing.
How do you know that?
Because all of the excess of knowledge we do have, we know doesn't work to do that. There's lots of problems in philosophy that show it doesn't work, like the problems indicated by Descartes, and the problems indicated by the problem of the criterion.
Descartes didn't think that. Chisholm didn't think that. I ask you why you think this, and you name problems that don't have anything to do with that.
Except they do exactly say that. This is the numinal distinction. Descartes shows we know we can't have absolute certainty. We don't have the reality of
But nobody said anything about absolute certainty.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. You're asking about my position, which is
probable truth. I was asking you how we can have, if you thought we could have probable cause.
My answer was no, because you need absolute certainty. You need something in the numinal to put in the denominator to get a probability, and you don't have it.
But why think you have to have something certain to get something probable? Why think that?
Because you need something from the numinal to compare the numerator to, our knowledge. You've got to compare it to something with the denominator being something in the reality itself, which we don't have.
And I'm saying I don't see any reason at all to think that what you just said is true. Why would we have to do this idea of comparison doesn't even make any sense to me. I literally don't know what you're saying. It makes it's like 'twas brillig and the slithy toves did gyre and gimel in the wave. I mean, you're talking about numerators, denominators, comparing reality with reality. You're hurting my brain, man. I don't understand what in the world you're talking about. I'm talking about making observations about the world, taking in experiences, and coming to conclusions, just probabilistic conclusions about the way the world is on the basis of those observations. That seems pretty simple. And I can't even get you to go in for that.
Could we be in the matrix? Yes or no?
Yeah.
What do you call that?
What do I call what?
We could be in the matrix. I call that there's a probability, there's a chance we're in the matrix. So we can't be certain we're in the matrix. Right?
Okay, yeah.
So we're going to classify that. We're going to put that in a box and say all of those kinds of certainty claims, those are now in a category. We're going to give it a name. I'm going to call it the numinal.
The numinal is, you use the word numinal to refer to certainty claims?
I can call it bubbles. Don't care. We're going to call all of those kinds of claims about could we be in the matrix? And if the answer is yes, we can be wrong.
That's not a claim, that's a question.
All of
could
the kinds
be in the matrix is a question, not a claim.
All of the kinds
of losing me, man.
Be in the matrix and be wrong because we're in the matrix. We're going to put those claims in a box, and we're going to call that box something.
I still don't even understand what kind of claims you're talking about. Tell me just
any claim that we could be wrong about, ever, about anything. Any claim that we could be wrong
about. So why don't we just call those the fallible claims?
Okay.
I mean, that's what most people call them.
Okay. All right, so we're going to put those in one claim, and then we're going to put the infallible claims in another one. We're going to call them the infallible and the fallible.
And I'm going to chuck
same
those out the window because I don't care.
That's the same distinction I've been talking about the entire time. The numinal and phenomenal. The infallible is
a metaphysical distinction. Certainty and uncertainty is an epistemological distinction. They are worlds apart.
Great. I'm going to combine the two and put them in, say, the same categories. So we have
that's just like an admitted confusion then. You can't just put them in the same category when they're different.
I'm trying to say use different words to try and explain the concepts here, and that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to make a comparison here to try and explain this to you. It shouldn't be too hard. Most people get it pretty quickly, including philosophers. So
yeah, well, they might appear to, but that isn't an infallible guide to reality.
If we could be wrong, and that kind of a claim that we could be wrong about is in the fallible claim. And if there's a kind of claim that we can't be wrong about, that would be the infallible claim.
So here's the argument I think I'm hearing. So I think I can put this into a simple modus ponens. It sounds like you're saying this. If it's possible that I could be, or I guess the fundamental principle is this. If it's possible that I could be wrong about something, then I can't know it. Or no, forget knowledge. If it's possible that I am mistaken, I cannot have any evidence.
No, just say if it's possible I'm mistaken, we're going to put it in a category and give it a name.
Well,
kind of thing.
Well, here's a question then, a related question. Do you believe that the fact that a claim cannot be known with certainty means that we cannot accumulate any evidence for that claim?
We can't use, like, we have the fallible and the infallible. If there's a claim, how did you phrase it again?
I said this. I said, do you believe the following proposition? For any given proposition P, if we cannot be certain about P, Neither can we have any evidence of any probabilistic evidence with respect to P.
Right. So I would say that if we have a proposition P and we can't be certain about it, then in order to claim it is, I still don't know, use the word knowledge here. In order to claim it's knowledge, you need certainty, some kind of certainty class of evidence to justify it. To call it the
why do you believe?
And then I would say there's a lowercase k knowledge where it's probabilistic, and if you have probabilistic justification for it, then it follows into the lowercase knowledge category. So I agree. It's still knowledge. I agree with everything in the scientific worldview. We're just getting rid of all this kind of metaphysical stuff.
I mean, Bud, you got tons of metaphysics going on there. you got more metaphysics going on in this amount of time than anybody I've talked to in a long time. you got tons of metaphysics. So I still don't know the answer to the question that I asked you. Here is a claim, and I want to know if you believe it. Okay, this is like yes or no kind of stuff. For any proposition P, if you cannot be certain about P, then you cannot have any probability about P.
No, again, I would break those into two different classifications. I'd say probability is one and certainty is another, and they're different kinds of claims.
So is that a yes, you do believe that proposition?
I'm not sure. Probably not.
Probably not.
When I listen to people critique presuppositional debates and discussion, what I see is people get angry at the presuppositionalists because we so much are talking about what these things that seem so abstract. When in reality, when the reason why we do that, well, a number of reasons, is that it's very difficult to talk about specifics without talking about the undergirding principles that give coherency to those specific things. And the average person just wants to hear the facts. But I think the reason why I wouldn't give you, say, a cosmological argument is because I don't think that would be sufficient for you, given your standard of evidence, which I've heard you say earlier today and in other contexts, that if any supernatural explanation that I give for something, you can just posit, some unknown naturalistic explanation. In which case, it would seem that there would be no evidence, specific evidence, that one can give, since it would never be sufficient for you. I would seem to me that on my as evaluating that standard, it would seem that the only way that God could make himself known to you is if he imposes the knowledge of who he is upon you, but then that would violate your principle of the best possible world, in which if there was a God, he wouldn't force anyone to do anything. So it seems as though you've built a wall based on how I understand your perspective, but you've built a wall that in principle, God couldn't even reveal himself to you, even if he wanted to. I heard someone asked you a question. Maybe you remember. What evidence would you accept for there being a God? And you said something that if you prayed, that a gold brick,
yeah,
right, that would be pretty cool, actually. Then you would believe. And I thought to myself, well, that's funny. Why would you believe as a result of praying for a gold brick when you just stated that the standard is that any supernatural reason that we can give, you can posit an unknown natural explanation? The brick appearing in your hand, that wouldn't be evidence for you. You would just say there's an unknown naturalistic explanation. And so I would see from that perspective that you have in my opinion, an unrealistic standard of what would constitute evidence. For example, let me ask you a question, and then you could ask me a question. I'm blabbing here.
Actually, can I just comment on that? A few things. So the first thing is that, yes, I would be happy to believe in the supernatural if it made testable predictions. If you could predict a gold brick would appear when I prayed, that is good evidence of the supernatural.
How?
It would not, well, it's the same way science does. It's the way science predicts new things is by saying, if there's this new thing, I'm going to predict this consequence. If I see the consequence, that's good evidence of the new thing. So it's the exact same as science. Like if you could show that the supernatural makes future testable predictions, or magic or miracles or any of those things, I'm happy to believe in any of those.
How?
But I wouldn't believe in an omni property. The omni properties are the hard part, because if you can generate one gold brick, that doesn't show that you're all powerful and can generate infinitely many gold bricks. That's a different kind of a claim. So I would be happy to believe like there is a being who created the universe. That can be shown. It can be shown that Jesus rose from the dead. Those are potentially justifiable with evidence, and I could potentially come to believe those with the correct amount of evidence. I couldn't come to believe there is an all-powerful being. Those omni properties are the things that I can't justify, not the supernatural. I'm happy to grant the supernatural is possible.
So if Jesus rose from the dead, what would that prove to you?
Well, I would be willing to grant things like that there's a supernatural, that there are supernatural beings and they can do things, and there's probably like a heaven and a hell kind of a thing. The only things I wouldn't be willing to grant is that God was like uncreated and couldn't have been created by another greater being, or that there aren't other gods,
that makes no sense to me. Okay, so well, first of all, you would be misunderstanding what the concept of God is when we talk about God from a Christian perspective. You can't have a greater God, since the Christian definition of God is that there is nothing greater. So to posit a greater God than the greatest would be an incoherent statement. Now, if Jesus rose from the dead, that wouldn't make you believe that the meaning of his resurrection is what Jesus would say that it is, right?
If he was the one that predicted it, yes. So whoever makes the testable predictions are the ones who get the...
Yeah, but the testable predictions can just be posited by some unknown natural explanation as to why those things occurred when those conditions were the way that they were.
Oh, so you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. But whoever makes the testable predictions first is the one who gets the credit. So like in physics, the people who predicted the delayed quantum eraser experiment was the Bohm's...
What now? I'm sorry?
Delayed quantum eraser. It's the one where we said that the two particles are probabilistically unset, or just... Yeah, so in physics, in science, whoever makes the testable predictions first gets the credit. Their theory is the one that has the best explanation. So right now in physics, the Copenhagen interpretation is the best theory because it made the last predictions, even though every single one of the other interpretations can also explain the predictions. So the fact that it was first and it was right and it got it right, that's good evidence.
Okay, I don't see how that's evidence because it's the first, because you could always posit an equally valid, as you would state, naturalistic explanation. Whether it's the first or the second, it doesn't matter. You still have barred yourself from coming to any conclusion as that being an evidence for the supernatural. So it's almost like you've defined the supernatural right from the beginning. So if Jesus rose from the dead, that would not be enough evidence for you that Jesus was who he said he was, and that the things that he taught about God, which would include everything in the Old Testament pertaining to his omnipotence, that wouldn't be proven. So even the resurrection wouldn't prove the Christian God for you. If I prayed and the ocean split open and we can walk through dry land like the people in the book of Exodus, if that happened on your standard, that wouldn't be good evidence for you. If God,
no, those would be good evidence. Those would
I don't see how it could. I don't see how it could, based on the standard of evidence. What counts as evidence? When you say
I made a 15-minute video about an allegory of the scientific method and how it works. You're right that there are always infinitely many ways that we can explain anything. Like we could be in the Matrix, and that could explain everything, all of the things we've seen, and all of the science we've seen so far. We could have been created 5 minutes ago. We could have been
that's my favorite.
Boltzmann brained. All of that is possible, but the evidence we have is whichever one of these explanations can make predictions before we know them, because whichever one can do it before has better evidence than all the ones that can only do it after.
I don't see how that follows at all, because if you can always give a naturalistic explanation, then it would make vacuous and any event being explained either by natural or supernatural. It would seem as though who cares if it does it before? If I predicted the future, perhaps you could argue. Maybe there's some unknown principle in nature that enables beings such as humans to know certain things before they happen. And so what I'm saying is that standard seems like an unrealistic standard. Really, there's nothing short of God imposing his own existence upon you that would actually give you a justification on your view to believe that he was who he said he was.
Well, in the omni properties, that's correct. I can't believe the omni properties. Those are out. But I can definitely believe everything else. Everything else is totally reasonable to justify with evidence. If you can make a prediction that Jesus is going to rise from the dead tomorrow and show up at my door and knock on my door, that's good evidence. I will believe in the supernatural.
Evidence for what? It wouldn't be evidence for Christianity, since Christianity posits that it's an omnipotent God that raised the dead.
Right. The omni properties are harder. The omni properties I can't justify, but you can definitely justify the supernatural. You can definitely justify Jesus raising from the dead. Those are possible. You can definitely justify that the universe was designed by some kind of a being. The only things that I can't grant are those omni properties, those infinites. Because if you said you could hold infinitely many napkins, no matter how many napkins you show me holding, that's not infinite. That's not even a single % of infinite. So you can't convince
be able to hold an infinite number of. Are you referring to like an omnipotent being? holding an infinite number of napkins?
Right, just any omnipotent thing. If you say you have infinite power in this one respect, no matter how many finite examples you give me, that's not going to demonstrate you have infinite power.
Infinite being holding an infinite number of napkins is an incoherent concept to me.
Well, it's just an analogy to try and show
But it's an incoherent analogy. It's an incoherent analogy because to hold napkins requires hands, and if you have hands, you have a body, and you have, by necessity, limitations, and so you wouldn't be omnipotent.
Well, the point of the analogy is to show that if you say you can do something infinitely, no matter how many finite number of times you do it, that doesn't give me even a single percentage point of reliability that you can, in fact, do it infinitely. Right?
So in other words, if Jesus rose from the dead, that wouldn't be enough to prove the truth of Christianity to you.
Right, it wouldn't be able to prove the truth of the omnis. I can still grant everything else, but not the omnis.
Well, you couldn't grant everything else because everything else is wrapped up into the nature of God and all these other things that he reveals. From Christianity, this is a very important aspect of presuppositionalism, is that the self-attesting nature of Scripture, all of the aspects of Christianity, especially in regards to God's nature, are essential aspects. They're a package deal. If you read someone like Van Til, he says that we don't prove God's existence in a piece-by-piece fashion. We assume the package because it's the package that gives coherency to all those other individual aspects.
Surely you care about the notion of probability, right?
Yes.
Okay, well then that's our common ground. Let's talk about probability and how beliefs become probable. I think beliefs become probable when we have certain sorts of experiences that correspond to evidence for those propositions. How do you think propositions become
Let me give you an example. If I said I can hold infinitely many napkins, what finite number of napkins would make it probable that I can hold infinitely many napkins?
Well, it would depend on what kind of being you were. If you were a divine being, then it might not take much evidence at all.
What? Why does the being matter? I don't get it. So what finite number?
Because if you said how many pounds can you carry, I need to know what your strength is. If you're talking about just an ordinary person, I can probably predict the limit of how many pounds you can carry pretty accurately. But if you're like, oh, sorry, I didn't tell you, we're talking about Thor, well, then the answer is going to change.
You remember that whole numerator-denominator thing I was talking about?
I remember you saying the words.
Right. So let's suppose you don't know that. You have no idea what kind of being I am. I say I can hold infinitely many napkins. What finite number of napkins will justify or make probable the belief that I can hold infinitely many napkins?
Well, each successive napkin would increase the probability by some unit. That's all I care about.
80 billion trillion?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Give me a number. Just 80 billion trillion. Let's say I can hold 80 billion trillion. Would that justify or make it probable that I can hold infinitely many? By what amount?
It would make it more probable than that number minus 1.
I'm okay with that, but give me a percent. What is the probability of the truth of this claim that I can hold infinitely many napkins?
That would depend upon the priors, which would depend upon what kind of being you were.
Which you don't know. You don't have that information.
It's literally, utterly unknown?
Yes, all you have is I said I can hold infinitely many.
But how do you tell me? Do you look like this and you tell me? Then I think that it's overwhelmingly unlikely. If you tell me by writing it in fire in the sky, because you got to understand that the way the message is conveyed itself gives me evidence about the claim.
Right, and you don't have that either. All you have, the only pieces of information you have is that I claim I can hold infinitely many napkins, and I'm holding a certain number of napkins.
How did I learn that you claimed this? That I read
no
it
idea. You don't have that information either. You don't even remember it. I'm the Descartes demon. I just wiped it from your memory. You only have these two pieces of information. I claim I can hold infinitely many napkins, and I'm holding a finite number of napkins. That's the only thing you've got.
Well, then I wouldn't even be able to have the thought because...
Bingo! Wait, you wouldn't be able to...
There's no bingo.
Yeah. Go back. So you have two pieces of information. You have two pieces of information. I claim I can hold infinitely many napkins, and I'm holding a finite number of napkins. Give me the justification. Give me the number. What is the probability by any number of finite number of napkins that I can truthfully hold infinitely many napkins?
I just wake up, and the only memory I have, the only thought that I have, is that Tom Jump made this claim?
Person, entity, being X claims it can hold infinitely many napkins, and it has a finite number of napkins in its hand. Give me the probability based on any number of napkins that it is true that it can hold an infinitely many number of napkins. You can't do it, can you? There's nothing you can do. If you don't have a denominator, there's
Hey,
nothing.
Tom, does x squared equal y? Huh? Does it?
It can. It's possible.
Gotcha. You can't tell me, can you?
Right.
Bingo.
That's the entire
Bingo.
point. Yeah, bingo for me, because you just granted everything I just said. The numerator, my entire analogy is the numerator and the denominator. You need to have information. What? I can't.
I said I'm nice that way. I like to make people happy.
You have to be wary of the person you're talking to. Are you talking to someone who's philosophically literate and who likes to debate, or someone who's more emotionally tied into things?
That's a great way to put it, I think, is that a lot of people
Go
are.
away, please. I'm on a phone call, on a television, with a camera. Go away.
Like, so I think it's
Go away
like,
now.
like it's like a common thing where people would be kind of like,
One
philosopher. No, it's all right.
I'm on the camera. You cannot turn the thing on. No more laundry. Yes, you can come down later. Come down later. I'm very busy right now.
Someone has a question within the chat. Shannon Q has a question. She wanted to know, James, if you have a Discord. Oh, by the way, if you want to join mine, I'll definitely make you mod in it. But if you have one individually, be sure to just send the link to me, or just post it in the chat directly. But either way, we'll definitely get that in there if you know, it's present. The one problem with muting is that sometimes it's tough to unmute from this position to Shannon.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
No problem.
If I say there's one God, yeah, that's right. I'm not saying there's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. Absolutely, totally, fundamentally, and in every conceivable way, irrelevant.
Right, and I'd say that only applies when you're talking about those kinds of absolute properties of all-powerful, uncreated, all-knowing, eternal.
Uncreated isn't an omni.
I would say it is, yes.
Why?
Because it's assuming that there isn't anything before it. You're claiming that there is by definition.
What? There's no omni in that. There's no omni in that.
How is that not an omni? That's like you've existed.
How is it?
It's like saying you've existed eternally, kind of.
Or that it popped into existence.
Which would
and saying that it exists eternally, it could exist apart from time, and then you wouldn't have an infinite number of moments. Do you think the universe had a beginning? Like, do you think all reality? Do you think all reality had an absolute beginning, or do you think that there was never ever a time when there was nothing?
No, I would go with the never ever a time there was nothing.
Well, then you believe in an infinity.
Right.
Come on,
I agree.
man.
I agree. I say that's unsupportable. I can't support with anything. It's just an assumption.
But you just said you believed it.
Right. It's not. I'm not claiming it's knowledge. It's just a completely arbitrary.
I didn't say it was not. I didn't claim you claimed it was knowledge. But to believe it is to believe that it's true. To believe it is to believe that it's probably true.
Right. I have a fideistic belief in it. That's it. And I'm okay with that. If you have a fideistic belief in those properties,
I think you shouldn't be. I think that's flat out crazy and irrational. To just like pick it, you just literally just picked it.
Yeah, I'm just using my arbitrary sense experience and saying I'm just going to extrude this on to infinity because I like it, essentially.
That's not intellectually responsible.
I would say it is because I don't know. The correct answer is I don't know, and that's.
Well, I don't know whether the number of stars is even or odd, and I'm not going to like pick a side. I'm not going to say odd because I like it because I'm odd because I like to play on words. That would be crazy.
Exactly. Is I don't know, but if you're going to ask me, I'm going to pick odd. Okay.
Oh my gosh! All right, that's your view, man.